If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Jonbenet Ramsey series here on Mindshock, the most comprehensive and exhaustive series on the infamous Jonbenet Ramsey case ever, with logic and reason at the forefront, unlike any other podcast, documentary, or series out there. This is episode 16, a full suspect list. And obviously the Mindshock series is the most exhaustive, but believe it or not, there's a plethora of suspects and POIs we have not even gotten to examining, and we will attempt to do so today. As always, if you enjoyed the Mindshock series, find it informative, and want to help support the podcast, help keep up awareness in unsolved cases, cold cases, missing persons cases, wrongful convictions, and more, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. If you're still not getting the notifications, just make sure to like and comment a lot more on videos. Apparently, the YouTube algorithm will unsubscribe you, or at least not show you updates if you are not more engaged in the content of the channels you are subscribed to. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Alright, so obviously this is not going to be a actual full suspect list. A better title would be a full major suspect list. We're going to go over minor suspects as well, but there's literally over 100 suspects that have been put forth. And obviously we can't go over every single one in a single episode, but hopefully you've listened to the previous episodes. You're well aware of many different suspects. We're going to go over the least talked about ones now, and including some that have possibly never been talked about, because this is Mindshock and we upturn every stone. So, of course, a lot of theories circulate over a possible acquaintance of the family, some kind of predator in some capacity with connections to the family. So, let's go through a few here. Now, we have reference to an alleyway boogeyman. And you know what's crazy? If they ever did make like a fully comprehensive series on the Jonbenet Ramsey case, it would be tough. It would just be countless hours, because there's just way too many suspects, POIs, side subplots, weird connections like the former housekeeper connections, the Vodka connection, the floor safe, which no one seems to talk about. There's just so many issues in this case that nobody talks about. I'm going to postulate that some of these untalked about issues might actually be the key to solving this thing once and for all. But let's look at references to an alleyway boogeyman. Can't make this stuff up, people. In Steve Thomas's book, page 140, quote, one of Father Rahl's parishioners claimed he came across a crazed-looking man standing beside a truck behind the Ramsey house, holding some white cord and a stick, and grunting, quote, you can't have her, she's mine, end quote. So just when you thought this case couldn't get any weirder, apparently there's also accounts of crazed-looking individuals holding a cord and a stick, rambling that no one can have her because she's his. What is going on here in the Ramsey area? Now, was this all made up? Apparently this guy was investigated. So this is actually really creepy. There's another reference on the next page, page 141. He embellished his story periodically with new clues from visions. Quote, he said the mysterious stranger was also at St. John's Church during the Christmas pageant just before the murder and whispered to him, quote, don't you just want to strangle her, end quote. We checked out everyone he named, then even searched his apartment to make sure he wasn't the murderer. Gosage and I probably spent about 200 man-hours chasing the alleyway boogeyman, and it came to nothing. So Steve Thomas here is stating they spent 200 hours on this alleyway boogeyman. See, this is the other thing that's kind of weird. I really do understand why some people think this is some kind of vast psyop. Again, that doesn't mean that Jonbenet Ramsey wasn't a real person. That doesn't mean she didn't die. Just the nature that all of this unfolded, the investigation itself, the media, everything in the media since, all of this points that it could theoretically be some kind of psychological operation. But if we're taking Steve Thomas at his word, which some people won't do, but again, I have this is Mindshock. I'm not claiming or hallucinating to know anything is true or untrue, or anyone is stating the truth or not, unlike some of these other illogical people out there. So this guy, so there were 200 man hours focused on this parishioner, this church parishioner, who claimed that there's a mysterious stranger, possibly some kind of transient or homeless guy, and he was at the Ramsey home behind a truck, stating, "You can't have her, she's mine," and that supposedly this same guy was also at St. John's Church during the Christmas pageant before the murder, and quote, and said to him, quote, "Don't you just want to strangle her," end quote. Now, if this really happened, so what are the options here? And also, what I found interesting, they even searched this parishioner's apartment because they thought he might be the killer and trying to divert attention away from himself by making up this story. That's what at least Thomas and Gosage considered, according to this, because they're claiming they also searched his apartment. But it all came to nothing. So what are the options here? Either this guy just made it all up for attention, although, I mean, it really isn't that crazy. So, I mean, unless there's more to the story that they didn't cite in the book. In the book, there's 2 occasions cited. At the Christmas pageant, and then also outside the Ramsey home. That doesn't state if it was before or after the murder. I'm assuming that was after, possibly when all the media circus was there. But if this is true and there was this weird guy, is it possible this was some kind of mental transient who was just rambling about, a girl in a pageant? I mean, statistically, there's got to be a certain amount of weirdos out there that have made weird comments like that. Probably. I mean, I don't know. But of all the pageants in history, or at least in America, you would think there'd be enough crazy people out there that at least a couple have made some weird comments about strangling contestants. Maybe not. But if they have, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. If they're completely mental, they don't act on it, obviously. So if this guy is telling the truth, is that a possibility? Or the guy fabricated all this? Now, in these 2 scenarios, the guy still didn't commit any real crime. Certainly not killing Jonbenet Ramsey. So it doesn't... Or is there a third option where this guy really did kill her? But then why would he be rambling about that? I mean, it's definitely suspicious, but it seems like if this guy's telling the truth, it's mostly a mental case. That's what it seems like from the outset, unless more evidence is produced. I don't know what all the Mindshock listeners think about this, but again, in the interest of being completely comprehensive and exhaustive, I did want to go over this homeless guy, this alleged alleyway boogeyman reported by a church parishioner. So some people think that because this is a church parishioner, possibly a real Christian, who knows, they wouldn't lie about this. Now, again, regardless of whether they're lying or not, if it's some mental guy that had nothing to do with anything, okay, nothing there. Or the guy made it up for attention. But apparently, this guy's name was not released and he did not go to the news. So is he really making it up for attention? As far as I know, I mean, maybe he did, but in Steve Thomas's book, it does not state that, and I couldn't really find anything more on this alleyway boogeyman. Okay, next up we have who is known as the Arapaho suspect or Arapaho suspects, possibly up to 3. This information is coming from the one and only Jameson, aka Susan Bennett. If you haven't checked out the Mindshock podcast on her, make sure you check that out for the full background. Some people think it's kind of suspicious that she happens to be from the exact town where the duct tape was manufactured, but we're not going to get into that here. So, the Arapaho suspect or suspects comes from a December 10th, 2001 internet claim from Jameson that she herself had provided DNA samples on 3 reasonable suspects. What does this mean? So on candyrose.com, they have a breakdown of a lot of different info relating to this claim and these 3 Arapaho suspects. So she claimed that she sent DNA samples to the Boulder Police Department August 17th, 2001. What does that mean? That she sat on the DNA for 8 months? So supposedly this is a former suspect in an unsolved Arapahoe County murder. Cloth with DNA was turned in by internet tipster Susan Bennett, aka Jameson. And I'm guessing this was somehow verified that she did in fact turn this DNA in. March 18th, 2003, Jameson wrote, quote, "Remember when I got the Boulder PD to check out some samples of DNA? One of those samples came from a known pedophile who may have worked in the Ramsey house as a subcontractor," end quote. So does this intersect with possibly one of these other contractors? Does this possibly intersect with some of the people J.T. Colfax was referencing in what he found out in prison from these alleged stories? If you haven't checked out the J.T. Colfax episode, make sure you check that out. I mean, really, if any case was made into some kind of soap opera, I mean, this is really the one. Between this case and the Maura Murray case, I mean, there just seems to be endless rabbit holes. But in the Jonbenet Ramsey case, these rabbit holes seem to intersect many different things. I mean, there's even Jilzane Maxwell connections. If you haven't checked that episode out on Mindshock, check that out, and apparent connections to John Ramsey. But anyway, staying focused here on this, I mean, this is just insane. Bennett said sample is a personal belonging of a man who lived in Boulder December 96. She said it contains hair bodily fluids. Sample was mailed to her 8 months ago by someone intimate with the man. Okay, I mean, this is before I even read this. I made the soap opera comment. We are firmly in soap opera Mindshock land right now. So apparently, one of the girlfriends of this guy got his DNA and didn't send it to the Boulder PD. She sent it to Susan Bennett, an online web sleuth. I mean, what is going on here? So, Rocky Mountain News, August 17th, 2001, there's some verification here. Arapahoe County Detective Rick Falstett said that Jameson sent the tip to them, and the suspect in question gave voluntary DNA, and he was eliminated. So here's the other problem. When a random web sleuth sends in DNA, I mean, there's no chain of custody there, so what are they going to do with it? So even if she did send the DNA, I mean, did they even test it? Or did they go to the suspects and see if they could collect samples that they can prove would be legitimately those people's? And apparently this was done for at least one of the suspects in questions, and he was eliminated. Now here's the problem with the elimination, because again, this is the Rocky Mountain News from 2001. None of the DNA has been tested using current DNA technology, and the sample is degraded. So all of the previous tests really mean nothing. I don't know how many times I have to repeat this. People are still going on and on about people being cleared. Not a single person has been cleared using the most modern generation technology of DNA testing. Not a single person. And even if they are, that doesn't really mean anything, because if the sample's that degraded, I mean, I think the DNA might be a giant red herring here, depending if it really is that degraded. Again, I don't know. But if it is degraded, it literally means nothing, because you're just relying on fallible DNA technology. Now, obviously, the newer generation technology is going to be less fallible, but how much so? We really don't know. I mean, there's people being exonerated that were convicted on DNA evidence. Now, newer generation DNA evidence. Oh, all of a sudden they're exonerated. It actually didn't match, even though they pretended it was like 99.999 whatever. Obviously, it wasn't even anywhere near that for older DNA technology. Is it there now? Maybe. Maybe it is. But, the older DNA technology, we could pretty much rule that out. Boulder PD Mark Beckner also said there was some tested DNA for Arapahoe suspects. Rocky Mountain News, December 22nd, 2001, did not match. Again, how much does that matter? So here's the December 10th, 2000 post. My letter to press and authorities by Jameson. The Ramseys will never be arrested for the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey. Clearly, there's too much exculpatory evidence. The urgency to protect innocent people from being jailed on trumped-up charges is gone. The investigation continues, and I have great respect for the work being done by people like Ollie Gray and Lou Smith, but until a special investigator is brought on, I think we may as well admit the chances of solving this are between slim and none. The Boulder PD won't do the work, and some people are wisely refusing to participate in their misinvestigation any longer. Evidence has been mishandled and lost by Boulder authorities. The Boulder PD has turned away people who say they may have information dealing with this open murder investigation. Witnesses have openly stated that they felt the cops didn't want to talk about any suspect not named Ramsey. Right or wrong, people don't trust the Boulder police anymore. They are unwilling to work with the Boulder police, and they are told they either work with the Boulder cops or forget it. People are walking away. I have informed Alex Hunter that I know of some evidence files that are being withheld from the Boulder PD, specifically DNA on 3 very reasonable suspects. I will tell them exactly where these envelopes and files are and when and if a special prosecutor is appointed. I faxed this to the DA and some time back and received no response. For those concerned about the evidence, it is properly stored. I called Henry Lee himself and went over this with him. He said he couldn't accept or test evidence unless it went through the Boulder PD. I advised him that wasn't an option, and thankfully the gentleman went over proper storage of evidence with me. I got the feeling that I was not the only one who had that conversation with him. Since Henry Lee and Alex Hunter are personal friends at this point, I think it is fair to assume Lee has told Hunter about the conversation, and I hope it convinces Hunter that this is not a joke. As you can see, I have once again gotten involved in a way that might stir some controversy, but I am very serious here. I will not aid any more Boulder Police Department bungling. I believe the case can be solved. The evidence is there. I am hoping that DA Alex Hunter will request that a special investigation be started, remove the BPD from the equation. So what have I said? The exculpatory evidence is there. The Ramseys did not kill their daughter. People no longer trust the BPD, and they are unwilling to carry information or evidence to them because they fear it will be ignored, mishandled, or lost. There is evidence being withheld. The BPD will not be handed that evidence. The evidence is not in one place, but all are safe. When a special investigator is brought in, I will tell them exactly where it is. None of it is now in my personal possession. Will this letter make any difference? I don't know. Probably not. But I carefully thought out the pros and cons of releasing this letter, and I can't see the downside. No matter what side of the fence people are on, I hope they will join me in calling for a special investigation in the Ramsey case. Investigate all leads, all the evidence, let the truth be exposed, and let the chips fall where they may. Written with all sincerity, let the chips fall where they may. Jameson, December 10th, 2000. All right, so, if we thought we were in soap opera land before, so here's a web sleuth somehow obtaining DNA, admitting to withholding this evidence from the police, going to renowned forensics expert Henry Lee on how to store the evidence, claiming that, again, is there any verification that she even spoke to Henry Lee and that he advised her on proper storage? I don't know. But Henry Lee is telling random web sleuths how to store DNA evidence in order to not give it to police? What is going on here in this case? You really can't make this stuff up. I mean, again, if this was a novel or a fictional novel or a movie, it would just get shut down for too many plot holes. And then, of course, so I don't know what changed. So apparently she sat on this for months and months and months and then eventually did give it to the Boulder Police Department. And then news outlets did report that this was done. For example, August 17th, 2001, tipster provides possible DNA evidence in the Ramsey case. And even Police Chief Mark Bachner addressed all of this. So, yeah, so now, does anybody think that they actually didn't test the DNA and then just said that they did just to make this all go away? I don't know. Now, even people who had followed the case, I don't remember this much of a deal being made. But apparently there's actually quite a bit of DNA evidence in this case. And also, wow, this is actually pretty crazy. Wow. All right, let me go over this post. This was from the Web Sleuths Forum, December 9, 2001, titles 100 Items by Jameson. Also, a news link here. Colorado police do new DNA test in the Jonbenet Ramsey case by Reuters, August 17, 2001. Boulder, Colorado, police investigating the murder of child beauty queen Jonbenet Ramsey are having DNA tests conducted on an item submitted by an internet tipster. A new lead in a nearly 5-year-old case, officials say Friday. We did receive a tip, a piece of information we thought was worth testing, said the Boulder Police Department spokeswoman Yana Peterson. She declined to identify the item that had been turned over to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for tests. The body of 6-year-old Jonbenet Ramsey was found in the basement of the family's home in Boulder, Colorado, December 96. According to the Rocky Mountain News, the item is a personal one belonging to a man who lived in the Boulder area at the time of the murder. It was turned over by an internet site operator who goes by the name Jameson. Peterson said DNA on the item will be compared with DNA found at the murder scene. If there is a match, police would have to conduct further investigations, she said. However, the tests were expected to take several weeks. You know, it's weird, too. Like, all the way back in the early 2000s, tests are taking weeks, and yet nowadays, they could still take months and months and months, close to a year. Weird. The tipster said the item was delivered by someone who claimed to be intimate with the owner and contains hair and bodily fluids. The newspaper said the item is from a former suspect in an unsolved murder in nearby Arapahoe County. No arrests have been made, although police have questioned nearly 600 people and tested 100 items. So that's actually pretty interesting. For the people that say that there wasn't a thorough investigation, I mean, you can call it incompetent. Call it incompetent if you will. But apparently, there were quite a few leads followed, interviews done, all of this testing on 100 items. Police have said the parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, remain under an umbrella of suspicion. The Ramseys now live in the Atlanta area and have denied any involvement in their daughter's death and have criticized police who they say have botched the case. So this is an interesting forum post. They checked hair and saliva. So are we talking maybe 50 people? Ramsey, Boulder, and Atlanta. That's at least 10. Whites, Fernies, Steins, Father Hoverstock. Let's be conservative at another 10. The housekeeper, the babysitters, and AG people. That's another 10. Again, I think a conservative number. Neighbors, photographers, gardener, people like Chris Wolf and Randy Simons. If they were tested, another 10. That means they may have tested 10 people we don't know about, but if it was my child, I think I would have expected more, especially when we know that there have been many people who are reasonable suspects. 100 tests is nothing. Another post here. There are only the items that you have found easy to know of, but look at the items from the search warrant affidavits, and more of them become logical test sources. So there were hair fibers from a victim's pillow, 44 KKY. Whose hairs? One might assume Jonbenet's, but DNA would confirm. Also, there's hair fibers from Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey's bed, 52 KKY. If Jonbenet's hair was found there, they may have an innocent explanation, but it would support an infidelity theory if 52 KKY belonged to neither John, Patsy, Jonbenet, or Burke. DNA testing would confirm or deny innocent ownership. That's a good point there. Hairbrush found in Mr. Ramsey's bathroom, 53 KKY. Spoon, 5 pp. Glass, 6 pp, which are obvious sources of mouth DNA. Underwear, 9 JRB. So girls' underwear, 36 BAH. Girls' underwear, 56 BAH. Girls' underwear, 61 BAH. Girls' underwear, 62 BAH. 5 pairs of girls' underwear, 76 BAH. 2 pairs of girls' underwear, 77 RAH. A pair of underwear, 45 BAB. Child's underwear, 57 BAB. Child's underwear, 58 BAB. Child's underwear, 59 BAB. And men's underwear, 53 BAH. So these are all items as sources of DNA. Now, of course, if they're all innocent, if they just all belong to the family members, then nothing's there. But do we know that for certain? Obviously, we do not. Another interesting post from Jameson here. August 29th, 2002. The BPD compared 2 DNA samples for me. One, they came back and said that based on the comparison, the man was cleared. It couldn't possibly be a match. That was a good thing. I got to tell the man's closest family that he was innocent, and they didn't have to have any doubt. Or do they, again, with this fallible DNA tech? The second sample, however, they said wasn't a match. Well, we know the DNA profile in the Ramsey case is not a full profile. It is a partial. There can't be an exact match. I asked, can you exclude him? They refused to answer the question. They just said it was not a match. I went back to that tipster and told them what I found out. I certainly couldn't say that I knew for sure he was cleared. I don't. Have to watch for these words. Interesting things. The cops knew the name of the person giving the first sample. The second went in as a John Doe, and they never asked me afterwards who it was. I found that odd. Maybe they know. Maybe that profile was already in their system, so they know. But the fact is they never told me they knew who it was or seemed at all interested in knowing the name. That's another interesting point. Another post from Jameson, March 18th, 2003. Remember when I got the Boulder PD to check out some samples of DNA? One of these samples came from a known pedophile who may have worked in the Ramsey house as a subcontractor. His family had come forward. The Boulder PD ignored them, so they came to me. I went in a bit of a back door to get the sample taken in and the family protected. First, the family called the BPD and asked if any had that specialty handicraft was in the house. They were told no. But when the photos of the house started being broadcast, they felt betrayed by the BPD as it was there clear as day. Specialty handicraft? I'm not sure what's being referred to here. So that is just one they ignored. The DNA was checked. I was told there was no possible way he could have been the donor, so I personally consider him cleared. But I hope the new team goes back and verifies that those tests were really done. That's a great point. That was one. Add Oliva, Gardiner, Helgoth, McElroy, all in the same area with problematic records. They need to start over and look at all the decent suspects, and that will keep them busy. Okay. I mean, that's a good point. That's a good point. So we have fallible DNA technology as part of the variable here. And also, we really don't know if these tests were even done. I mean, what if they weren't done and they just said they were done? I mean, that wouldn't be the first time ever something like that has happened. So then we also have John Gardiner. I believe I mentioned him at least in passing. This is the homeless guy who was working at Pasta J's restaurant owned by Jay Elowski, who is a close friend and business partner of John Ramsey. Gardiner was arrested June 10th, 1999 for attempting to stab Jay Elowski with a knife. Now, there's a little bit more backstory here, and depending on the mental sanity level of Gardiner, one can, I guess, take what he says with a grain of salt, but let's examine it because this is Mindshock. So, allegedly, John Gardiner attempted to stab Elowski. He said he could prove Elowski killed Jonbenet Ramsey. He said names of the children coming up out of the sidewalk behind the Criminal Justice Center, and the children were crying out for vengeance because Jay killed Jonbenet. Again, that doesn't quite sound like a statement from a completely sane man. However, let's say he is completely insane. Is it possible? I mean, there's no magical Dungeons and Dragons spell or rule that prevents people with mental issues from uncovering evidence of murder or possibly being in the vicinity and overhearing certain statements that either really were indicative of some kind of murder or plot or weren't. But how would we know? The fact that they might have a mental condition, that doesn't mean they didn't really hear what they thought they heard or somehow know what they did. Because again, the brain fills in the gaps. The subconscious mind is a very mysterious and perplexing thing. I mean, obviously nobody really knows how it works. So if they can't process information in a, let's say, traditional way, would some kind of hallucination or visions fill in the gap, so to speak? So just because he had these visions or hallucinations, I mean, let's assume they were. Let's not get into any kind of interdimensional theories here or any of that. But let's assume they were hallucinations. Were they a byproduct of some evidence he might have stumbled across, didn't know how to process it, and that's how it came out? Nobody ever wants to talk about these things. Coincidence theorists, they just completely ignore any and all possibilities like this. So let's look at this article here. This is Rocky Mountain News, July 5th, 1999. Ramsey case snags wide circle in its web. By Charlie Brennan. The discovery of Jonbenet Ramsey's body in her parents' basement 2.5 years ago has led to no fewer than 10 arrests. None have been for the 6-year-old's death. While the grand jury investigation into the killing is winding down, a still growing string of peripheral players has been pulled under by the backwash. Records and reputations have been tarnished by charges ranging from trespassing to attempted arson and racketeering. It's kind of mind-boggling, said Lincoln County Sheriff Leroy Yowell, whose department had a role in one of the saga's more unusual sideshows. One prosecutor says many who touch the case or are touched by it come away tainted. Boulder County Sheriff's Detective Steve Ainsworth, who worked on the case more than a year for Boulder DA Alex Hunter, has never seen anything like it. Ordinarily, on a major case, a murder case like this, we're bringing in everybody and throwing everything we have at it for 72 hours, he said. As a result, you solve all kinds of other stuff along the way, but usually it's old cases, things you had outstanding. In this case, all the arrests were made in new crimes driven by the case. Ainsworth traces it back to the media attention surrounding Jonbenet's Christmas night 96 slaying. So many people get caught up in the publicity that they want to become part of it, he said. They end up becoming too much a part of it and getting themselves arrested. Former Globe reporter Jeff Shapiro is one of them, and he thinks there could be more. Actually, I don't think enough people have been arrested, said Shapiro, now a freelancer working for Time. One Supermarket Weekly staffer said his publication has been the subject of at least 4 separate criminal investigations, none resulting in prosecution. Shapiro was issued a summons for trespassing and harassment after he went to the secluded mountain home of a Ramsey family friend in July 1997 bearing flowers. This was after he'd called the homeowner, Patty Novak, and she'd told him he was unwelcome. Novak told deputies that Shapiro called her on a cell phone from her front porch, letting it ring up to 20 times. Shapiro said he was doing his job. I was ordered by my editor, Craig Lewis, to go to her house, leaving me very little choice in the matter, he said. I felt intimidated into doing what I was instructed to do. Lewis, currently promoted to news editor at the Globe, said, just as he has so many times in the past, Jeff seems to have a hard time taking responsibility for his own mistakes. Neither I nor anyone else at the Globe ever instructed him to harass anyone. I noticed he didn't deny going to her, telling him to go to her house, though. The Boulder DA's office deferred prosecution at the condition that Shapiro stay out of trouble for a year. He did. A far more serious case is that of James and Regina Rapp, an Aurora couple indicted by a Jefferson County grand jury June 24th on 2 counts of racketeering. Employees of the Rapps' firm, Touchtone Inc., impersonated Jonbenet's father, John Ramsey, in an effort to obtain receipts for purchases by Patsy Ramsey at McGuckin Hardware in Boulder the month before the killing, the indictment charges. It is believed Touchtone was acting as an agent for a California private investigator who, in turn, had been hired by a tabloid television program. A search warrant executed by Boulder detectives against Touchtone's Denver office May 29, 1997, showed that the police seized folders containing phone records of Jay Elowski, a friend of the Ramsey family. Also found was information on P.I. H. Ellis Armistead, who was hired by the Ramsey team and had at least 58 files on the Ramseys. Elowski, incidentally, is part of the Ramsey-related crime mosaic as both perpetrator and victim. In 97, the Boulder restaurateur earned 2 weekends on a Boulder County jail work crew plus 1 year of probation after pleading guilty to misdemeanor menacing. He was charged with threatening 2 men he believed were reporters at a time when John and Patsy Ramsey were staying at his home. More recently, the Ramsey case claimed 46-year-old John Gardner. Gardner, a homeless man employed at Elowski's restaurant Pasta J's in Boulder, was arrested June 10th for allegedly attempting to stab Elowski. Gardner said he had proof Elowski was involved in Jonbenet's death, witnesses said. One witness told police that Gardner had claimed that he had seen the names of the children coming out of the sidewalk behind the Criminal Justice Center and that the children were crying out for vengeance because Jay killed Jonbenet. Elowski, a close friend and business partner of John Ramsey, was in Michigan when Jonbenet was killed and has never been a suspect. And again, do we actually have 100% verification of that? Because if somebody alibied him, I mean, how many levels do they check? This is something that even so-called true crime aficionados, they don't want to talk about this for whatever reason. I don't know if they don't have the mental capacity or they're too mentally weak to consider the problems with law enforcement investigations or that detectives can be fallible in some way. But what does it take to clear somebody? 1 or 2 alibis? 3 alibis? You know, maybe a ticket that may or may not have been bought by somebody? I mean, unless they have actual CCTV footage, I mean, how do they know for certain he was in Michigan? This is something nobody wants to, not just him, anybody. I mean, nobody wants to talk about this. I'm going to interject here with another really, really dark theory because some people allege that the Ramseys were involved in some kind of Illuminati rituals, child sacrifice, exploitation, whatever, if their circle of so-called elite friends or just people of high status, politicians, whatever, in the Boulder area and otherwise all across the country, possibly the world, if all these people possibly attended the party where Jonbenet Ramsey was either killed or harmed in some way, if there were certain offhand remarks made to the circles of people around them and they were overheard by other people, is that why there is seemingly, although completely inconclusive, uncorroborated anyway, there is seemingly rumors or trickles of information regarding so many suspects? Is that because they were somehow tangentially related to people who may have attended these Illuminati ritual, satanic abuse type parties, which Jonbenet Ramsey might have been at? And maybe she really wasn't killed at the party, but maybe they thought she was. Maybe there was some kind of accident. Maybe she died later. Who knows? Would they say certain things that people might have overheard or perceived to be incriminating to the party making the statements, unaware maybe that there's a whole lot of people possibly involved, so they just erroneously filled in the gaps and thought that they were the sole perpetrator? Is that why we're seeing so many suspects and so many people who believe that certain people are guilty in some way? I mean, again, I'm not claiming this is true in any way. This is Mindshock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. All the Dunning-Kruger goofs get instantly triggered whenever I say something like that. These goofs hallucinating that I'm somehow claiming that that's true in any way. Obviously, I'm not. I mean, we're talking first grade English here, and so many people are so deficient. They flood the comment sections with their Dunning-Kruger stylings because they were so triggered in not understanding basic English. I'm not claiming that's true. I'm bringing forth one possible theoretical that might not be true in any way, just attempting to account for variables which seem to be a never-ending circle of suspects and people who believe whatever suspect is guilty. But let's continue on here. Alowski supposedly never been a suspect. Gardner is set for a preliminary hearing July 8th in Boulder County Court on a felony charge of second-degree assault. The Raps, free on bail, could each be sentenced to as many as 24 years in prison and fines up to $1 million upon conviction. Several people have encountered Ramsey-related trouble that don't constitute criminal arrest or charges, but still add up to a legal headache. Freelance photographer Randy Simons, who had taken pictures of Jonbenet for her beauty pageant portfolio, was apprehended October 16, 1998, when a sheriff's deputy found him walking nude along a street in Genoa, an eastern plains town of 200 people. Yowell, the Lincoln County Sheriff, said that when approached by a deputy, Simons volunteered unsolicited, "I didn't kill Jonbenet." I mean, this is years later. This is kind of weird. He was taken into protective custody, treated at University Hospital, and allowed to return home 3 days later with no charges filed against him. Said one detective who had worked on the case but would speak only on a condition of anonymity, "I've been involved with grand jury cases before where you'll get peripheral players that are brought in through conspiracy or whatever, but never anything like this, where you have everybody and their brother, J.T. Colfax being the best example, feeling the heavy hammer of the DA's office while the killer is still out there, uncharged." Colfax, a Denver artist whose legal name is James Michael Thompson, has just a few more days to serve on a 2-year Boulder County jail sentence stemming from his failed bid to start a fire at the Ramsey's Boulder home in the summer of '97. Colfax is the only person in the case arrested twice. He pled guilty to stealing the page from the logbook at the Boulder County morgue that documented the arrival of Jonbenet's body. Although incarcerated, Colfax has hardly been silent. As recently as June 16th, a Colfax drawing was posted on his website, The Colfax Diaries. It depicted an anguished figure rendered in bold, aggressive strokes, the following message emanating from its mouth. "Listen carefully," it began, echoing the opening of the Ramsey case ransom note. "There's a certain buzz about the next scheduled meeting of the grand jury. In a briefing at the jail on Wednesday, June 16th, a sign-up list was circulated for volunteers to be on possible Ramsey overtime." What? Even from jail, one more player reluctant to leave the stage. And another reference here from October 14th, 99, from westword.com, "Send in the Clowns" by Patricia Calhoun. And then, of course, there was Jay Alowski, owner of Pasta Jay's restaurant and a friend of the Ramseys, who had put John and Patsy up in the early days after Jonbenet's murder. In July 97, Alowski pled guilty to misdemeanor menacing. He'd brandished a baseball bat at the two men he thought were reporters on Patsy's tail, but who turned out to be mild-mannered engineers. Had the hapless victims actually been reporters, no jury in the land would have convicted Alowski. But Alowski got his. This summer, John Gardner, a homeless man who was working at Pasta Jay's, attacked Alowski with a knife, accusing him of being somehow involved in Jonbenet's murder. Gardner was charged with second-degree felony assault, the most significant charge yet to emerge from the case, in Boulder at least. Still, so far, no one has suggested that Jay Alowski or John Gardner killed Jonbenet. Okay. So here are my thoughts on all this. I would have completely written all this off if not for the fact that Alowski seems to be one of the closest friends of the Ramseys who they trusted that much that they actually stayed with him. So this leads me to believe that he might be possibly in the Ramseys' inner circle. If he's in their top social inner circle, and there was some kind of a party where she died or some kind of Illuminati rituals or otherwise or something not related to that. But it's possible Alowski has some kind of insider information. Now, did Gardner mishear the information? So he was erroneous that Alowski himself was somehow connected or responsible? Or possibly not. But the fact that Alowski's the one that put up the Ramseys, so they're staying with him... See, that makes it harder to completely dismiss John Gardner, whether or not Gardner has mental issues. Also, in Steve Thomas's book, page 323, there's a reference to a cook at Pasta Jay's. Is this the same guy? You know, it's weird, though. Apparently, John Ramsey himself... If I'm reading this correctly, so this is page 323, Ramsey offered up a smorgasbord of suspects that included a cook at Pasta Jay's restaurant, a striking couple from back east who had been seen in the church, his secretary's boyfriend, other church members, business associates, pigsty neighbors, and assorted fringe players. The most surprising name he turned over was that of Jay Alowski, his friend and business partner in Pasta Jay's restaurant, who he said possibly owned a stun gun. It was to Alowski's home in Boulder that the Ramseys retreated after returning from burying Jonbenet in Atlanta. Alowski defended them so staunchly he was arrested for threatening two men he believed to be photographers intruding on the Ramseys' privacy. Throwing Alowski under the bus just about eliminated the Ramsey circle of friends in Boulder. Okay, so the first thought that just randomly jumps into my mind... this is a dark thought, so trigger warning for all these people out there that think there's no such thing as any kind of political corruption or blackmail or any of that stuff going on, that there's no corruption in politics or anything of that nature, despite all the evidence. But did something... So Ramsey... So Access Graphics, connected to Lockheed Martin, is celebrating $1 billion. $1 billion. They reached the $1 billion mark. I mean, that's a pretty big milestone, to say the least. How many companies reach the $1 billion mark? How many companies associated with Lockheed Martin that result in somebody in somebody's daughter dying? If there was something going on in political, some kind of political circle, some kind of upper echelon, some kind of big players, so to speak. Now, you don't have to call them the Illuminati, but whatever. Some kind of elitist, rich people, powerful people in some capacity. Did John Ramsey get on somebody's bad side? Did they make an example out of him through his daughter to the point where he wanted to throw them under the bus? That was him getting... Because he couldn't reveal the real reason. He doesn't want, his son to be killed or him and his wife to be killed. He still has a family. Then he's got his other children, Melinda, John Andrew. So he doesn't want all of them to be killed. So it's not like he could ever tell the truth about anything. But is it possible he fired back in a small way to this circle in Boulder? Maybe. I don't know, but that's the first thing that jumped into my mind. Why would he be, if Steve Thomas is not lying, why would John Ramsey point the finger in Jay Olowski's direction? His friend and business partner and the guy who he stayed with. Him and his wife stayed with after burying his daughter. Obviously, he must have trusted. I mean, he must have trusted him, and he must have been close enough to a certain respect to stay with them. These are the questions. I mean, these are the big questions. And again, obviously, John Ramsey's still alive at this moment. So why not do a brain fingerprint scan? How about that, John Andrew? How about that, Burke Ramsey? Not that they're guilty of anything, but they might have information they don't even realize they have. Because if they're close to people that they would never believe would do this, or maybe they do believe it but just have never talked about it, a brain fingerprint scan would solve a lot of issues, would it not? Would it not? From OK Magazine, posted February 17th, 2020. There's more of a reference here. Among his other business interests, John Ramsey was an investor in Pasta J's, a popular Boulder pizza restaurant run by his friend, Jay Olowski. John and Jay were said to be close, good friends, and it was more than a simple business relationship. The Ramsey family were regulars at the restaurant and even ate there on the Christmas Eve before Jonbenet was murdered. Wait a second. So they were there? Why has this not been referenced? So they were also at another party, but they also ate at Pasta J's? Huh. I mean, that puts the scrutiny even more further on not necessarily Jay Olowski being responsible, but some kind of information possibly being shared there that this homeless guy who worked there. Like, here's the other thing, too. Like, why are all these rich people randomly hiring homeless people, transients, convicted criminals, like all the contractors in the Ramsey home? That's a little weird, but whatever, because it's not only at the Ramsey home. Apparently they hire, I mean, again, if he was just a homeless guy with no criminal record, we don't know this guy's criminal record, but yeah, so they ate there the Christmas Eve before Jonbenet was murdered. I mean, that's an interesting statement there. This is on OK Magazine. I don't see the source here, but can anybody verify that? In the days after her death, Olowski put John and Patsy up at his place so they could get privacy away from the media scrum. But Olowski's desire to shield his friend from the press backfired on him. In 1997, he brandished a baseball bat at two men he thought were photographers who had been harassing Patsy. They turned out to be simply engineers. In July of that year, he pled guilty to misdemeanor menacing, reported Andy Tillett. Okay, so... yeah, I mean, yeah, that's weird. Gardner, now 65, is still living in Boulder, and his name is still on the list of uncleared suspects. Wow, this is straight from OK Magazine. They're claiming he's uncleared. Detectives working on the podcast were able to track him down and confront the elderly man face to face. When they did interview him, Gardner referred back to Olowski and his dwindling restaurant. Quote, his restaurant was picked up and put on the back of a truck. He loved his restaurant and he lost his restaurant. I thought that he might have some resentment against the city for allowing that to happen. So I thought, like, well, maybe he has motive to kill Jonbenet to get vengeance on the city of Boulder. And that was my theory, Gardner stated. I started looking around, and when the ransom note came out, I started picking up little pieces of paper that had his writing on there, Gardner continued. I started to put a little book together, and I convinced myself that he wrote the ransom note, so that freaked me out. On June 10th, 1999, things came to a shocking head. Gardner attacked Olowski with a knife, claiming that his actions were guided by the spirits of dead girls demanding justice for Jonbenet. One witness to the attempted stabbing told police that Gardner claimed the children were crying out for vengeance. Gardner was arrested and charged with second-degree felony assault. After spending the afternoon with Gardner, he finally agreed to give a sample of his DNA for testing. Okay, interesting. Interesting. So he's claiming he convinced himself. I mean, see, here's the thing, though. If he does have these severe mental issues, does he not even remember any kind of little bits or snippets he might have overheard? Was he there the evening? So on Christmas Eve, if the Ramseys really did eat at Pasta J's, was Gardner working at the time, and did he overhear something between the two guys? Something that may have had nothing to do with her death, but that he might have thought that it did? But either way, I mean, it's just a seemingly never-ending stream of curiosities in this case, and they don't seem to end. They never end. So let's get into Randy Simons now, the photographer who had taken pictures of Jonbenet Ramsey and was behaved strangely following her death. Now, some people allege if there is some kind of Illuminati satanic abuse ring of sorts that photographers are in on it. So also from Candy Rose here, Randy Simons legal cases, October 16th, 98, he was charged with indecent exposure. Randy Simons was a freelance photographer who was hired to take the glamour photos of Jonbenet Ramsey in June 96 for her portfolio. Simons sold the portfolio of Jonbenet photos to the New York-based agency named Sigma Photo Agency for $7,500 in January 97. October 16th, 98, Simons was caught walking naked down the streets of his hometown of Genoa, Colorado, nude. He had recently turned 46 at the time. Media reports state that when Lincoln County deputy approached Simons, he volunteered unsolicited. I didn't kill Jonbenet. Simons was held in Lincoln County Jail for a psychiatric evaluation, then treated at University Hospital. Simons was not charged and was allowed to go home. Okay. So this was years ago. Now, there's been a lot more information since. So I will go to thesun.com. Again, a lot of people don't find some of these so-called tabloids credible, but their track record is, it might even be better than the mainstream newspapers when you go back and actually fact check it. But let's look at this article here. It's concerning. Jonbenet Ramsey photographer released from jail due to coronavirus may know what happened to her and could now disappear. And now it's interesting phrasing, too, because perhaps he was not personally responsible, but he knows who was. Again, if there is some kind of circle and these dark satanic rings of child abuse, etc. Again, if you haven't checked out the Johnny Gosh podcast series, or you're a hardcore coincidence theorist and authority-worshipping cultist who thinks that law enforcement or politicians could never be involved in something like this, I mean, there's just a mountain of evidence, unfortunately. I mean, this is definitely things that conspiracy theorists don't want to be true. A lot of these triggered goof coincidence theorists, they don't understand. Conspiracy theorists, aka critical thinkers, they don't want to be correct. This isn't an ego contest. They would prefer that it all be incorrect, because who wants that level of evil? But unfortunately, if you're a critical thinker, you know how to employ logic and reason. You're just going to examine the evidence. You're not going to let your preference for what the truth should be interfere with objective, logical, and neutral examination of evidence and facts. So this is by Emma Perry, April 10th, 2020. Jonbenet Ramsey's personal photographer, who has been released early from jail due to coronavirus fears, bragged he had information about the murder that he was unwilling to reveal and may now pose a flight risk, it has been claimed. Randall DeWitt Simons, released from Lane County Jail, Oregon, ahead of his child porn trial after his lawyer argued his age and heart condition could put him at risk of catching COVID and dying from the virus. Simons was arrested in his home, Oak Ridge, Oregon, last year, charged with 15 counts of encouraging child sex abuse by downloading child porn at his trial set for May. Now, some people think it's just too much of a coincidence that the Ramsey personal photographer involved in child beauty pageants is, it's kind of crazy. But on the other hand, the child beauty pageant industry, so to speak, would theoretically attract those type of individuals. So I don't know what to make of that. But obviously it's not something that can just be easily dismissed. A judge in Lane County, Oregon, ordered that Simons be released on a third-party release at the end of last month, court papers obtained by The Sun reveal. Now, two authors and crime researchers who spent over 20 years investigating the 96 murder of 6-year-old beauty queen Jonbenet have voiced their concerns about Simons' release, saying it is worrying as he has displayed strange and bizarre behavior over the years and even admitted he knows more about the horrific murder than he was prepared to reveal. They believe this also reminds me of Rusty Nelson, the photographer involved in the Franklin scandal, connected with the Johnny Gosh case, allegedly. And his comments were also very, very mind-shocking, so to speak. I mean, the photographers definitely know stuff in terms of, criminal rings and such. So I don't know if I could just outright dismiss him as just some kind of mentally ill individual. They believe the 67-year-old, who is Jonbenet's personal and pageant photographer, may even pose a flight risk as he is used to living under the radar. Veteran crime researcher Joyce Singular told The Sun it is very concerning that he has been released. What if he disappears? He has lived under the radar fairly successfully for all these years. It's worrying. Her husband, Stephen Singular, who wrote the Jonbenet investigative book Presumed Guilty, revealed how Simons' behavior was extremely suspicious in the aftermath of the murder. I spoke to a number of pageant moms, 4 or 5, and they all told the exact same story, which was that Randy Simons had been calling them up in the middle of the night after the murder, screaming and crying on the telephone, saying, quote, "I did not kill Jonbenet, I did not kill Jonbenet," end quote. This was obviously very curious behavior because no one at the time was looking at him as a suspect. See, here's the thing. Okay. All right, this is really weird. Because again, I'm not alleging he's guilty of anything. However, if he does have some kind of knowledge and it's weighing on his conscience, would that cause a kind of mental breakdown where he's just obsessed with proving his own innocence because he really is innocent? But since he knows what happened, or possibly knows what happens, or the individual's connected, and there's just heavy layer of guilt, would that cause a mental breakdown? Would that cause him to randomly call up random pageant moms in the middle of the night screaming this? Would that cause this to be the first thing that comes out of his mouth when he's picked up by a deputy in the middle of a mental breakdown? Or, of course, if he is guilty and he's just in the middle of denial because he can't handle that fact, I guess that could also explain it. But I don't know. I don't know if that's the most likely scenario. As time went on, I eventually went to the DA, Alex Hunter, with my concerns about Simons and other people associated with him, and they really didn't know anything about him. This was 100 days into the case, and they eventually started looking into him. There were other people who also talked about him conducting photography which was questionable. Not to say that it was child pornography, just that people had been in his studios and made comments about things. He was a questionable character. He had told people in the aftermath of the crime that he had photos of Jonbenet and he didn't want them to come out. It was a big controversy. Then, in 1997, he was living in a small town called Genoa, Colorado, and he was arrested for walking up the street naked. When the police approached him and picked him up, he said something along the lines of, "I did not kill Jonbenet." Stephen said most concerning was when he spoke to Simons over the phone a couple of times, he claimed to know more about the crime that he was willing to discuss. From the very beginning, he was behaving very bizarrely and strangely, Stephen said. I interviewed him a couple of times over the telephone and tried to ask him about all this. I said, do you know about this crime? Do you know more about this crime than what you're willing to talk about? And he said, yeah, I know more, but I'm not going to tell you. And the way the investigation was conducted, Boulder police were so fixated on the Ramsey family that someone like him was never looked at very seriously. My feeling was not that he was involved in the crime, but I've always believed that there were people in the periphery of this crime who knew things that may have been going on around Jonbenet outside of the family. That's a really good way to put it. That's a really good way to put it, because that seems to be the case. I believe they're connected more with this realm of photography and beauty pageants and all of that. I always felt that that was a very ripe area of investigation. He added, when it came out that he'd been picked up on multiple child porn charges up in Oregon, it wasn't that big of a surprise to those of us who had been following Randy over the years. Simons was interviewed by Boulder County Sheriff's Detective Steve Ainsworth in '97, who was brought in to work on the case at the time. His DNA also does not match that found at the scene. But following Simons' child porn arrest last year, Detective Ainsworth, who is no longer working on the case, called for the photographer to be re-interviewed. Huh. Wow. In 2020? 2019? 2020? Boulder Police Department, which is now running the investigation into Jonbenet's murder, refused to answer whether they managed to question Simons before his release, telling The Sun they were unable to comment about the case because it remains open. Author Stephen is convinced Simons may be the key to finally discovering what happened to tragic Jonbenet. The main question is Randy Simons was Jonbenet's primary pageant and personal photographer. He was that close to her, Stephen said. In an unsolved murder case 23 years later, that person was picked up on child porn charges. You would think that in an open case, the most infamous case in the history of Colorado, that a police department would be interested in speaking with him. You would think that they would be interested in knowing what else was on his computers and what was in his archives. His behavior from the very beginning was at the very best bizarre. The Sun reached out to Simon's lawyer and the DA's office for comment. A more recent article from Mia here, Who Killed Jonbenet Ramsey? Beauty Pageant Seamstress Points Finger at Pedophile Photographer Randy Simons by Priyam Cherti. So it's kind of weird. I mean, there's multiple people here. There's quite a few people who've pointed the finger at this guy. A pageant seamstress has come forward to urge the police to look into the role of pedophile Randy Simons, 66, in the high-profile murder case of American child beauty queen Jonbenet Patricia Ramsey, who was killed at her family's home in Boulder, Colorado, December 26, 96. Pamela Griffin, who was the one who introduced the Ramseys to the pedophile photographer, said that she had told the police many times that he had a hand to play in 6-year-old Jonbenet's murder. She sustained a broken skull from a blow to the head and had been strangled. A garrote was found tied around her neck. Simons, who is currently in Lane County Jail in Eugene, Oregon, is awaiting trial after being charged. So he's still in prison? July 2nd with 15 counts of child pornography. He was caught after he downloaded it over the Wi-Fi of an A&W fast food restaurant August 11th, 2018. He had repeated the same again June 27th this year and was nabbed by Detective Robert Weaver of the Springfield Police Department. She told Daily Mail, "I am begging the police to look again at this man," she said. She alleged that he had told her that he did not have an alibi for the night of the murder. He had been questioned earlier about the murder, but nothing panned out. You know, it's kind of weird just to offer up information that you don't have an alibi and then randomly call. So he offered up information to the seamstress, a pageant seamstress, that he doesn't have an alibi, just randomly offered that up to her, and then also randomly calling pageant mom saying he didn't kill her. That's anybody find that weird? Griffin also told the outlet that she had submitted proof to the police that connected Simons to the murder. She had found the same type of nylon cord that was used in Ramsey's murder in his home. You know, I mean, a lot of people probably have that same kind of cord, though, right? So, I don't know. However, she hadn't heard back from them. Boulder County Sheriff Detective Steve Ainsworth, who had worked on the request of the DA Alex Hunter to review Ramsey's homicide, said that he had also wanted him questioned over the girl's death. He had interrogated Simons in 1997. I can't remember what he told me the first time I saw him, but no matter who we interview, they never tell us the entire truth the first time. Sometimes they'll think of something later, or they purposely hide things they don't want us to know. If he's been doing kitty porn, then it's been for a long time. Obviously, he didn't want us to know about it then, so what else did he not tell us, he said. I would want investigators to go and talk to him, to go through all his computers and phones, downloaded media, all of that, he added. She had hoped that connecting them would help Ramsey's career, but it was far from so when on December 26, 96, little Ramsey's body was found brutally strangled. Griffin had been friends with Simons, and that she had said he started acting odd after the death. Randy used to call me on occasion and confide to me about his marital woes, but after Jonbenet's death, he called acting odd, she said. He would say things like, I have a feeling the Boulder Police Department thinks I'm responsible in some way for Jonbenet's death, and I can't prove that I didn't do it. I don't have an alibi for where I was on Christmas Day 96. I told him he needed one, but he said he didn't want Linda, his wife at the time, to find out where he had been. I didn't know if he was having an affair or hiding something else, she stated. Uh-oh. Okay, so this is a problem. So if this is all true, if he's admitting to his seamstress, so he does have an alibi, he just doesn't want to reveal it. Well, if it's an alibi, is it that he was at some kind of a satanic abuse party where Jonbenet was also at? He had also been afraid that someone would pin the murder on him. He said things to me like, I know they think I did this, and I know they're going to pin it on me. Everybody thinks I killed her, said Griffin. You know what's weird, though? If he is just completely mental, even if he's innocent, he could have extreme paranoia where he thinks everybody thinks he's guilty, even if nobody does. I mean, that is kind of weird. Or some could allege this is a telltale heart type situation where if he's guilty, he's going to constantly go on about it. Then again, I mean, if he's Again, if he doesn't have a mental condition, you would think he wouldn't want to draw attention to it, but who knows? The case has been mishandled as it came to light in 2015. Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner admitted crime scene evidence may have been mishandled. He reportedly told Reddit, quote, "Yes, the crime scene was not handled properly, and this later affected the investigation," end quote. I mean, is there anybody who doesn't already know that, though? Boulder Police spokesperson Lori Ogden told DailyMail.com that they were aware of Simons and refused to comment on the status of this investigation. Okay. And Simon's DNA was tested. Supposedly it doesn't match, or at least not according to the previous generation DNA technology. So Thera Kuhn has an interesting write-up on Randy Simons on the Jonbenet Ramsey subreddit. Pedophile Network Part 8B, Randy Simon, JonBenet photographer explanation. Randy Simons was a photographer for JonBenet and took some of the more questionable photographs of JonBenet Ramsey. On Randy Simons' alternative Facebook page under an alias, he posted that he was from the School of Hard Knocks and an avid girl watcher. Randy Simons for years now has been brought up again and again for his odd behavior and weird remarks. To another mother of a child, he asked her for permission to shoot naked photographs of her daughter. She did not respond kindly. Immediately following the murder, he left his family and fled hundreds of miles away, leaving his family and friends. Sometime down the road, he was caught running naked down the street. When police approached him, he said, "I did not kill JonBenet," without even being asked. He told another photographer, additionally, that paramilitary types were after him looking for original film negatives. Recently, according to the sheriff where he was busted at, he claimed to have knowledge pertaining to the JonBenet case. Oh yeah, probably a good time to mention, not long ago, Randy Simons was busted trying to send a ton of child sexual assault materials in a manner that matched his old paranoia. A lot has been written about Randy Simons relating to the Jonbenet Ramsey case in recent years. More eyes were prying onto him once he was caught sending enough pornography to fill up a computer hard drive. He was caught doing such in a way that is typical of those who are knowledgeable on what can be traced back to someone, but nobody can hide what they do when they are a marked man. A few weeks prior to what can be only explained as a dumping of materials to somebody else, in other words, the temporary transfer of his entire stash of materials he accumulated, something had to have sent him into this mode. My belief is that he read something that triggered him into a state that he was once in prior, a state of paranoia and fear, and no longer wanted to hold his stash, so the plan was to send it to another individual to keep while he cleaned up a bit temporarily. What could have prompted him to attempt to dump his stash with haste? One thing not well known is that Randy was actually quite active on social media, and he was in communication with a few individuals on Reddit. One of these individuals I attempted to connect with, asking for further questions relating to certain things to Randy. This was stage one, attempt to pull Randy to Reddit. My goal was to communicate with him, but unfortunately the man in the middle could not make that work, so instead I put out a hit piece on Randy Simons relating to certain stamps that were found on his pieces, and that they pointed towards more lucrative photographs being available. Less than 2 weeks later, after infuriating the man in the middle, Randy Simons attempted to dump his entire stash of materials over to someone else. Was it the series of posts I began making about him that set him off? Was it questions the man in the middle gave to him? Was none of that relevant at all, and was he simply selling his materials to another individual for quick cash to go fly fishing? Who knows? What is known is that the amount of materials he was caught sending has put greater men behind bars for many years. Due to COVID-19, Randy Simons is already back on the streets. So what does any of this have to do with the case? Well, for starters, a pedophile taking photographs that many believe are inappropriate. Google images, for example, with the star costume mistakes JonBenet's costume as lingerie, offering a host of other lingerie materials, with outfits crafted in New York where the network links to. Being convicted of sending enough child exploitation materials to fill an entire hard drive on a modern computer, it begins to point toward the elephant in the room again. Perhaps the most damning is that the coded boy and girl stamps found on the shoes. These stamps are most likely watercolor and done over the originals. These stamps most people do not notice until it's pointed out to them. But if people know what to look for, they know that it points to materials of not just one child, but two children, a boy and girl. You may think it's nothing, but when Randy thought the police were going to obtain other photographs he did not want the news to see, he went all schizo. I pointed out on a forum that it is known he visits, based on his altercation with other Reddit users and his social media nature, about clear marks being found on materials, and a week later he is trying to dump a metric ton of porn from his computer to someone else's. Nothing, question mark? It's not nothing. It isn't nothing, even if it is, because if it were a coincidence, it means he would have actively dealt and traded this type of pornography, and that there would have had to have been a network available to him if, for 20 plus years, he has been doing this and getting away with it. Randy Simons was miles away when the murder took place. He was written off as a suspect early on for this simple principle. I do not write him or anyone else, for that matter, off simply on the premise that they were not on location. When people say there is no evidence of child pornography being connected to Jonbenet Ramsey, a known photographer of many of the most questionable imagery of Jonbenet Ramsey, completely outside of the pageant world, so no BS about it, about being how pageants are, he took images of the outfits from a special curator in New York, coincidentally where the network has always had a major hub, was convicted over sending a metric ton of child pornographic materials that would have taken years to accumulate. The same individual asking the only other person interviewed in relation to Randy Simons as a photographer of children for permission to shoot her child naked. And this was the prestigious, well-sought-out individual that Patsy found to take pictures of her, who she may have even left alone with him to go get pizza, which, if you take away the Pizzagate stuff, has always been used as a code for more lucrative things, which is how Pizzagate started up as a conspiracy in the first place. Wait a second. So is this connected to Pasta J's, even though it's not primarily a pizza restaurant? Actually, so I looked up Pasta J's. So it's technically an Italian eatery serving thin crust pizzas, ample portions, and pastas made from family recipes. So it's a pizza and pasta place, basically an Italian place. I don't know. I mean, it looks like a classic pizza restaurant, but Randy Simons was a child predator, and he was talked about as a child predator for a multitude of years, who had accumulated a massive stockpile of materials, served less than 2 years in prison and jail for this offense, who was never adequately looked into, and as a result, who knows how many children may have been hurt. But you haven't heard of mothers coming out of the woodwork to say, he may have done this to my children. That is because it's clear from the testimony of one individual that the parents were 100% in on the abuse when it did occur. That's so dark. That is so dark. But maybe it explains, and it doesn't necessarily explain this, because maybe a lot of these parents, they did go to the authorities, and they do know, but for whatever reason, they didn't want to make that public. But I don't know. I mean, you would think they would still say that, without naming anybody, that people did come forward, but I don't know. The world can be a troubling, sick place. It was a mistake to put Jonbenet in the pageants, said John years later in retrospect. Interesting. How much bigger of a mistake is hiring a pedophile to take questionable photographs, of which he was worried about some surfacing? The ones that did surface were the ones freely passed to the media by himself. To be honest, an entire book could be written simply on this fact. John and Patsy Ramsey hired a child predator to take photographs of their child in skimpy, special designed outfits for a private collection of photographs. For what innocent purpose exactly? Finally, a photo that was inspired by Little House on the Prairie, the book that Jill Robinson was in possession of, that went missing, and was reportedly being passed from pedophile to pedophile by a source in the OCCK investigation. So this is the Oakland County child killer in Oakland County, Michigan. Are there more Charlevoix connections to Michigan? Of course, the Ramseys having their other home in Charlevoix, Michigan. And these alleged connection to the Oakland County child killer in Michigan. But again, I don't know. It's all probably coincidental. So I found another curiosity here on the Jonbenet subreddit, that Randy Simons might have been one of the Arapaho suspects investigated by Jameson, but regardless of whether he was or he wasn't, let's look at this comment by Mario number 1. According to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation records, Randy Simons, full name Randy DeWitt Simons, had a 1991 assault charge in Arapahoe County, Colorado. The DA dismissed the felony charge. He was either found guilty or pled guilty to the misdemeanor charge, and he ended up with 2 years probation and 100 hours of community service. I would sure love to know what the assault charge was about. It may or may not be worth noting that this was under the tenure of Arapahoe County Sheriff Pat Sullivan, a nationally prominent figure who later went down for trading meth for sex, was compellingly linked to multiple murders, and was probably overseeing a much larger pedophile network in the state of Colorado. Okay, wow. Wow. I mean, this is just absolutely astounding and mind-shocking. So, like, how far up the totem pole does all this go? And if there is a vast network of child trafficking or child exploitation of some kind, were the Ramseys involved either knowingly or unknowingly? So, we're going to get into possibly the most mind-shocking statement yet in this podcast series. I mean, this is really, really dark. This is going to be tough to even get through. But the response to Mario number 1's post by Searchin' Girl, I think there is probably a pedophile network along the Front Range. At least I have rumors of such. But absolutely, everybody seems to be in deep denial about it. Have you read this? Coffee Meetings with Judge Long. I find it shocking. However, I don't really agree with the stuff he said about Jonbenet Ramsey's murder, and by the time this story is told, it's third-hand information. Although having worked as an auditor at the university, I believe the fund accounting schemes are probably true enough to get away with for a long time. There are a few things in there as well about areas and places around Colorado Springs that ring true as well. Pat Sullivan is a prime example of why municipal buildings shouldn't be named in honor of living public servants who might later prove to be crooks. Okay, so let's look at this Judge Long statements. So let's go down into the possibly the deepest rabbit hole conspiracy in this entire case. So Judge Long is a retired municipal judge. So he died April 2010. And this is information assembled here. Coffee Meetings with Judge Long. It's a PDF from comments on a YouTube video. Again, make of them what you will. I am not claiming anything is true or untrue because, once again, this is Mindshock. The only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. I'm just going to go over this to see what everybody makes of this, and to see if it matches up other accounts, which we'll be going into afterwards, to see if there's any cross-validation here. So, apparently the comments are dated 2 weeks prior to August 15th, 2019. On this YouTube video, Jonbenet Ramsey, who did it in 1998. The video has nothing to do with the comments, so the video is just a Ramsey news piece. But so this is in end of July, beginning of August 2019. Here is what happened by Miss T, M-I-S-S-T. Part 1. To whom it may concern, I am writing this because I am confident that the Boulder authorities know that I am one of the 9 to 12 people who spoke at length with retired Lyons Municipal Judge William H. Long in the last 2.5 years of his life. The judge frequented the Trident Cafe in Boulder, a coffee house, some 2 to 3 days a week. Now, supposedly, it has been verified by other people that the judge did indeed do that. Now, whether or not he said these exact things or not, again, we don't know that. He spoke at length to 5 of us, sometimes in Lyons. He spoke even more to 2 older gentlemen of us 5 and allowed those 2 to take notes. After a few meetings with Judge Long, it dawned on me to ask about taking notes, and I started to take notes just after I would have coffee with the retired judge. I feel that at some point in time I'd be harassed or attacked for being with the judge while he was spilling the beans. If prosecuted for anything, I may get overwhelmed and railroaded in the case, even to be made a patsy in a contrived felony with falsely constructed evidence. More than a few times, Judge Long spoke of prosecutors and police's ability to fabricate evidence, with the FBI being masters of fabricating documents since 1950 or so. He said that almost every prosecutor can get a variety of assistance, legal or illegal, from the FBI and the NSA, especially if the case concerns a whistleblower. He spoke about cell phone technology, quote, "As long as our phone is picked up by at least 2 towers, they know where you're at within a meter. The cops who told me this were amazingly arrogant about it. George Orwell deserves royalty payments." Wow, what a quote. Boulder police have 5 suitcase-sized units that duplicate cell tower capability. They have mobility to track you to your back pocket. They got those in 2003. End quote. I later found out that these units are called Stingray. Bill referred us to the movie Enemy of the State for a very small sample of NSA techniques and treacheries. Yeah, that's an interesting movie. I've actually talked about it on a few different podcast episodes on a few different topics in true crime cases and otherwise. And so this movie came out in 1998. So if they were willing to publicly disclose certain technologies in this movie in 1998, what kind of tech does the U.S. government or military, the leading cutting edge, what kind do they really have, and how long have they had it? I mean, a common statement thrown around is that military tech is rough, or high-end government tech, intelligence agency tech, is roughly 50 years ahead of civilian. So, anyway, continuing on here, about the FBI, look at their cover-up in Omaha, the Franklin Savings and Loan, the absolute mess connected with that, dead witnesses, fabricated prison sentences, the whole enchilada. Former FBI guy Ted Gunderson researched that, and a guy named Webster Tarpley. Read everything you can get from Gunderson. The Boulder Library has Tarpley's book, The Unauthorized Biography of G.H.W. Bush. Bill said that if a whistleblower is desperately wanted, that he will be followed anywhere and everywhere, and that there is always extra untraceable money available in cash to, quote, to inspire the assistance of any jurisdiction, end quote. That's interesting that this Judge Long in Colorado is bringing up Omaha and the Franklin scandal, which, again, I've gone over on the Johnny Gosh series. Make sure you check that out. I mean, and, of course, Ted Gunderson. He assured me that the jury rooms are bugged in most of the judicial districts in Colorado, so the prosecutor and judge are forewarned of the decisions of the jury. Judge Long said that all state troopers and a few select Colorado cities and counties have electronic gear that does illegal searches, density meter, infrared, etc. Density meter since at least 1996. A density meter can look into a house or car and detect gunmetal, money to the dollar, agriculture-based drugs and powdered drugs, has a range of 250 feet. All troopers are well rehearsed in coercion and intimidation to facilitate a physical search after their illegal search. They'll especially pull you over if they detect $3,000 or more, or firearms. Uses a gamma emitter of some sort. I hope you've noticed the overly aggressive new laws concerning on-site forfeiture. The Colorado State Troopers have a stable of 30-something who are trained for one-on-one espionage, sabotage, baiting, and 100 men who act as spies. The spy guys will work the homeless shelters, the street scenes around the state to get a sense of what those folks are thinking. They're also on the Hill, the college area of Boulder, hangouts like Penny Lane, a past Boulder coffee shop, and the malls. Bill spoke of training of trooper drug search dogs. He said that every dog has a specific button to push that gets the dog to make his signal for drugs in a car. The button may be a sound made by the trooper or a movement of the trooper's foot. The times when he spoke of the treachery of authority, he always seemed to scan the group as though to see their reactions to the backdoor corruption, which he said is, quote, a standard option for prosecution, end quote. He claimed that Congress and the White House are all for show. And he was always adamant that the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, and the military-industrial complex illegally run our country, and they only answer to the banking system. I mean, is anybody actually surprised by any of this stuff, though? He seemed to have had little reservation with most of the details that he shared with us, as he appeared a bit disgusted and even angry about a sizable portion of his career. He often spoke of a well-hidden system of untaxed payments to trust accounts of judges, prosecutors, and many elected politicians and appointed officials. Some of them hide this illegal income from their spouses. With his painful grin, he told us to notice when someone gets in a position of public service authority. They always try to stay there for the clandestine money as much as for the power. He said that he has spent the last 4 years of his career researching the depths of this tax-free cash cow. My thought about why he chose to speak of these things is that he felt it was either of the 3 judges who he's confident arranged to put the cancer in his food at dinner, suggesting that he was being murdered. About him telling us of the hidden money, I told him that I'd heard that former DA Alex Hunter lived out off of Cherryvale, but that 2 tradesmen have told me that Hunter also had a place up Left Hand Canyon. I asked him if this would be the place where Hunter accepted his trust account untaxed clandestine mortgage payments. Judge Long seemed surprised that I knew about that place. Bill said Hunter has another illicit mortgage in New Mexico. Quote, that's where he hangs out these days, or should I say hides out. Bill said that if the taxless payola mortgage payments went to a rental property, that 4-Star Realty seems to be the property management firm of choice, end quote. He said that Hunter also made additional money with his handling of illicit drugs into Boulder earlier in his tenure. Bill claimed that Boulder police detectives took control of importing those hard drugs around 1991, and that the Boulder police have brought marijuana into Boulder since at least 1968. I mean, these are some really bold claims here by Judge Long, if this is even true. If this second or third hand account is true, I mean, this is very, very damning. Judge Long said that it is a Chinese gang that now supplies hard drugs and pot to the Boulder police detectives for them and select officers to distribute to local street dealers. At one point, the Chinese gang wanted a presence on the Boulder police force, so you will now find a Boulder detective with a Chinese name. Bill said that 3 sources, one being a letter carrier, have told him that the majority delivery point for hard drugs from the detectives is probably the Section 8 housing at 34th and Valmont. The late-night drop-offs in a couple of the overly numerous parked cars on that side of the street. You know what's kind of crazy, though? Does this connect to the vote? Is this part of the Vodka connection and the drug connections? Is that all connected to Boulder PD, this former housekeeper of the Ramseys? Dealers in as many as 3 apartments living there supply about 80% of the drugs available to the College and Hill area. Judge Bill was still curious about exactly how the Chinese gang moved their drugs, but he was told that Walmart trucks, J.B. Hunt and Schneider trucking firms are big in the drug transport business. Bill said that if an honest cop busts an approved drug seller, that case gets watered down or it just gets disappeared. He said that Police Chief Beckner is kept in place, quote, kept in place because for the most part he's a chump, that it is always 2 deputy chiefs who run the dirty operations along with the detectives running the drugs. Boulder Police takes counsel from the DA, who is complicit with the drug running and gets his cut. End quote. Per our lengthy exchanges on this matter, the various groups at the cafe were convinced of the reality of this long-running, untaxed, clandestine payola conspiracy, of Boulder police detectives' drug dealing, and of Hunter's absolute corruption. Hunter won't find any friends at the Trident or in Lyons. I told Bill that I've read about extra hidden money that cities, counties, and states have, and he confirmed that this is the main part of the package. In fact, it is cities and sometimes counties that hold these clandestine mortgages to conceal the untaxed transfer of funds from the eyes of the normal banking system. This fits well, as it is hidden investment property money from cities, states, etc. that pay to the hidden mortgages that are titled to secretive trust accounts of the thieving public officials. It's only natural that cities are the ones to hold these hidden mortgages. He said that this setup is so pervasive nationwide that it is a well-oiled and well-connected conspiracy system that communicates very well between its members. It is fully self-sustaining because every member of the system is self-sufficient per every member's heavy investment in the stock market. If there are any weak links in the system, the bulk of the rest of the system can easily assist with the temporary shortfall of a member's local payola responsibility. It's the nameless, forgotten city auditors who keep the second set of books, he said. Goldman Sachs does the lion's share of investing for these institutional investors, so of course they get the lion's share of any available inside political tips. We spoke of how a 2008 presidential candidate quipped, quote, I don't know how many houses I have, end quote. It came out the next day that he has 9. 2 days later, it came out that he has 14. All of us joked and speculated about how much monthly clandestine tax-free payola a long-entrenched U.S. senator receives. Members of the hidden conspiracy of this untaxed profit scheme are cities, counties, states, municipal, and state retirement funds, etc. This is the background for the phrase, "you can't beat City Hall," in the courts, because judges and prosecutors are the main recipients of the untaxed distribution of clandestine payments from the city halls. He said, quote, "This aspect of the scheme is not to be underestimated," end quote. Every recipient of these hidden goods is a criminal and a whore to that well-conspired system. There's probably not enough prison cells for the lot of them. Whoa. I mean, that's a pretty crazy quote, too. I've never seen also, quote from the judge here, "I've never seen a dime of this. I'm told that only a handful of municipal judges in Colorado are in on it. A couple in Colorado Springs and Denver are," Judge Bill claimed. "As long as the real thieves hold the keys to the cops, the courts and the legislatures of America will be a parasitic cesspool. It's the best protected and probably the longest running crime syndicate in the history of North America," end quote. I mean, is anybody truly surprised by this? I mean, again, I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue or that he even said this. But if this is true, as alleged, admittedly in YouTube comments, but this is pretty crazy stuff. But theoretically, it does seem to match some of these other conspiracy theories and issues with the so-called justice system. The judge said that he found this tax-free hidden public money system owns at least half of the stock market and, quote, "Yes, of course, the IRS isn't on the fix, fully complicit and involved," end quote. Bill sarcastically also said, quote, "Heaven forbid that a whistleblower should expose this scam scheme, and heaven help him too," end quote. Judge Long said that no city or state is bankrupt, that they just lie about what they really have so that dirty insiders can line their pockets with the unreported profits from hidden investments. He added that there are a couple of bank and mortgage firms that are in on the theft and will hide some of the clandestine mortgages. Okay, so now we're coming to the Jonbenet aspect here. Bill spoke of the Ramsey case with a bit of trepidation. Some of what I got was that it was from 2 older gentlemen that Judge Long spoke to at more length. So already here we have, this is allegedly from information coming from the judge here, so that's secondhand, and that this information is coming from other individuals, so now it's third-hand information here. So let's keep that in mind. But again, obviously we don't know whether it's true or untrue. They told me more after the judge had passed. Although, okay, so this individual here is claiming to have also spoken to the same men that the judge spoke to. Again, if everybody gets brain fingerprint scanned, maybe the truth will finally come out. But, so, okay. It was a co-blackmail pedophile party that was being filmed. So you know what's weird, though? In the post-Epstein era, some of this seems less insane. Because pre-Epstein, a lot of coincidence theorists, authority-worshipping cultists, the Dunning-Kruger crowd, they hallucinated and pretended there was absolutely no chance of any of this stuff. But now, post-Epstein, it's a little harder to dismiss, even for the most gullible of goofs with blind faith in the cult of authority worship. The girl was apparently accustomed to Dad and 2 others, but she was not used to Dad and 7 other men. Per her reluctance to participate, she was choked and hit on the head as some of the ritual-oriented discipline. You know what's absolutely insane? This was all theorized before these YouTube comments. So, I mean, this is kind of, because there were obviously these crazy, so-called crazy conspiracy posts. I mean, these have been going on since possibly late 90s. Early 2000s, at least. So it is a little weird, but the participants with John Ramsey were a Boulder deputy police chief, a top cop from Denver, a Boulder district judge, Boulder prosecutor Robert Shapiro, a prosecutor and district judge from Larimer County, and a guy from IBM. I mean, that's oddly specific, but okay. When someone said he remembered it was reported that it was investigators from the DA's office who contaminated the crime scene, Judge Long said, "Of course, probably Shapiro's handiwork. That if they intentionally contaminated the crime scene, does that lead this theory more credibility? Because I mean, yeah, it could be incompetence, obviously, but is it specific? Is it specific intentional contamination? Apparently, these sorts of events get filmed so that everyone on the films will help anyone else on the films that one tries to make a career improvement or has some other special project. Judge Long called this assistance Satanism. He spoke often of this even when not speaking of Ramsey. One of the coffee clutch attendees once said the phrase satanic dark arts, and the retired judge said that sounds like a more accurate phrase. Bill spoke of how prosecutors and judges will use psychic Satanism to attack, 1, the witnesses for the defense, and 2, the defense attorney, if that attorney has not already sold out to Satanism and is probably already ruining the case for the accused. Quote, the Satanism is used to confuse you in court, make you stupid, control you. He said that there are even a couple of public defenders who are in on this, and the rest of the defenders are satanically attacked by the prosecutor's office. He considered Shapiro to be a sack of snakes, but he wasn't sure if Shapiro was the top dog of that craft in that office. He thinks that the new DA is twice as evil as Shapiro. That the new DA, Stanley L. Garnett, declined to retain Shapiro merely because the two of them do, quote, different flavors of Satanism, end quote. He said that Garnett's dark arts activities may be on par with those of Denver DA Mitch Morrissey's, who just so happened to be one of the invited investigators on the Ramsey case, likely because of his advanced satanic skills. Judge Bill said that the use of their Satanism is the only real way that they can hide their clandestine payola operations, with untaxed payola and suppression of evidence at the top of the list of their ongoing crimes. It would be accurate to think of them as a cult. That's what they are in the worst way, power and money. Satanism is used to overpower any criminal defense. Bill was adamant about official incompetence being the number one tool in an official cover-up. Wow. That actually would explain quite a bit, wouldn't it? Using incompetence as a weapon. So just having all these useful idiots all over the place, and even the gullible masses unable to utilize critical thinking to discern any of this. This all kind of makes sense. Again, I'm not alleging any of this is true or untrue. This could be all made up nonsense. Major disclaimer for the Dunning-Kruger crowd. I am not claiming anything here is true and true. I'm just going over YouTube comments here. Are they true? I have no idea. So, the number one tool in official cover-up, incompetence, mentioning Vietnam, and the soon-to-be eternal fiasco in Afghanistan. Both hiding involvement in heroin and oil pipelines, and of course, in the Ramsey case, hiding pedophilia and Satanism. When initially speaking of the Ramsey case, the judge reminded us that a few years later, a woman offered testimony to Hunter about the case. She explained to Hunter that there exists nationwide satanic pedophile activity which she investigates. She spoke of how choking and hitting on the top of the head of the victim is used for discipline and training, which are the exact marks that the Ramsey girl had on her. Hunter stated in the Boulder Daily Camera, quote, if only 15% of what she said is true, then it is worth investigating, end quote. Hunter announced his retirement within 2 weeks after speaking with that woman. Probably another coincidence. Bill told us to drive by the Ramsey house to look at its design and iron fence around the lot. He called it your basic Bavarian satanic architecture. Carol and I drove a key Satanist, a pediatrician, in Moscow, Idaho, from a mansion like that one by putting orgonite around the property in 2003. Okay, hold on a second. Wait, what? Judge Bill said that prosecutors and judges use pendulums and rituals to summon demons and archdemons to do their bidding for them. Some of this was shown to him while he was being offered to teach him the dark craft. Okay, all right. This is all quite insane. Again, I'm not using insane as untrue, but it's just very, very mind-shocking. Now, this is all the way back in 2019, before Moscow, Idaho was on the map. Is it weird that this particular judge name dropped Moscow, Idaho, of course, the site of this atrocious quadruple homicide? Some believe it is also connected to churches and Satanism. I didn't even go over that in the Idaho student murders case series. Check that out on Mindshock if you have not. I go over a lot of the issues with the case, these animal killings in the area. Is it a little too weird that this guy, they just randomly dropped Moscow, Idaho? What? Actually, the person giving this account dropped Moscow, Idaho, not Judge Bill, but saying that this happened in 2003 in Moscow, Idaho. I've never even heard of Moscow, Idaho until the Idaho murders, but now looking at this account here, this is pretty weird. This is weird. All right, so the judge here continued, quote, it is the Satanism that you feel as soon as you walk into a courthouse, any courthouse. That Satanism has something to do with the marble in courthouses. Somehow the Satanism gets injected into the marble with ritual or dirty prayers. I remember something about the old Enron headquarters being filled with pink marble. Jeffco County Courthouse, Jefferson County Courthouse, lots of marble, feels like a cesspool even more than the one in Boulder. And we're not going to get into that in connections with Columbine. And, of course, all the other satanic cult rumors circling around Columbine, also in Colorado. Probably all mere coincidence. Bill spoke of the Boulder police Satanists getting dogs from the Boulder Humane Society in the middle of the night, and of the prosecutors and judges sharing in their ritual blood drinking. Quote, in addition to the prosecutors and judges' own ritual meetings. Other animals, but mostly dogs, are received from a small variety of other sources. Bill spoke of an indoor kennel where the dogs are kept prior to their demise, not very far up Lee Hill Road, within walking distance of Shapiro's home, which is at the end of Valley Lane, where many dark arts activities take place. Bill said that Shapiro is also active with Satanism in Summit County. He was told that most often before a Satan event, the participants will have a dinner party either at the Red Lion or at the Greenbrier, occasionally dining there after their satanic event. With directional hand gestures, he said, quote, the dirty Boulder deputies are assigned to the foothills where the Satanists play, and the clean ones get assigned to the flats. Bill added at least a baker's dozen of them, Satanists, live in the Lake of the Pines, a gated community between Boulder and Lyons. This also reminds me of other connections to the Johnny Gosch case where Paul Bonacci alleged that he and Johnny Gosch were both taken to a ranch in Colorado. And again, there's a lot of satanic Colorado connections as well, with going all the way to the Bush family and the royal family of England, which I actually went over in the Johnny Gosch series, so check that out if you haven't checked that out already. Bill told us that he'd heard multiple stories about the Papoose Club on Highway 67 up from Deckers in western Douglas County, and that it is the main evil party spot and education center for Colorado Satanists. There are select Douglas County deputies who patrol those local roads. All of them, the select deputies, are on duty for weekends and Satan events. They have a high-tech comlink for broadcasting and receiving with other Satan events elsewhere. You can see their microwave communication broadcasting and receiving drum from the road in front of the locked gate. They've been known to extend their Satan parties to the Franktown Cave and sometimes enclosed mines. When they visit the club, they load up the motels in Woodland Park and Manitou Springs, motels probably owned by Satanists. Judge Bill seemed excited and pleased to be telling us of the club. He once brought a list of favorite motels for the club attendees. Pikes Peak Lodge, Crown Point, and the Intercontinental. Bill mentioned that Woodland Park is the closest town to overlook the Air Force Rape Academy. Many of the leaders and instructors at the Papoose Club are civilians who work at Fort Carson, and some of them even live on the post. This clearly shows the CIA connection, I believe. The proximity of the Air Force Academy also shows strong CIA connection. My contacts have never seen military uniforms at the club, but they say that they know that some are military, federal intel hotshots, some thick foreign accent. And of course, just a quick sidebar here, does this make anybody else think of Michael Aquino and the Temple of Set? And this is Colonel Aquino, psychological operations. He's even gone on talk shows to talk about this openly. And it's weird how, like, a lot of coincidence they still deny any of this exists. But like the amount of it that's open, that has to lead one to question what are they not being open about if they're willing to be open about that. The Papoose Club brings in $4 million a year, most of it tax-free because it comes from these taxless hidden funds of cities and counties. Someone at the Trident once grilled Bill for details of the dark events at the Papoose Club and at Shapiro's. Bill stared at him for a moment, then he left for the day. Judge Long said that Satanists have finally completely taken over the Colorado State Police and that for the past 10 years or more they have only hired other Satanists. He suggested this could also be true in many, many states, just as the use of that density meter and other illegal tech toys. Also, it's a mystery as to where they're finding the massively oversized recruits for their new hires. He found out about the Larimer County Hetrick versus Timothy Masters case. He said, of course, it was Satanism related. He said that the guilty party was the doctor who died, who was murdered, before the fixed trial started, noting the doctor-like precision of how Hetrick was cut up. The two prosecutors, later both judges, were in on satanic activities with that doctor, but that they weren't personally involved in the Hetrick fiasco. But the satanic prosecutors did serve to protect their satanic comrade by railroading Timothy Masters on extremely thin evidence, like using a sort of satanic attack mind control on the jury, which is pretty much the standard for any prosecution. Bill claimed that it's nearly impossible to oust a satanic judge because elections can be easily rigged and bought out. And besides, another Satanist would just be appointed to any new opening. The committees that recommend judges are Satanists. All judges have been to that Papoose place for testing. New judges are selected by the quickness of the satanic skills that they demonstrate at the club. He mentioned that the Boulder police have their own room for satanic rituals, of course paid for with city funds. He said he wasn't perfectly sure about the details, but he does think a tunnel was dug to get to the room. He thinks it may go north from the basement of the police station to the next building occupied by a biotech firm. Bill said to look for an additional entry to the middle of the tunnel in the garages that are north of the police station. Bill knew that the Boulder police pay for a sort of subscription membership with a European Satanist group and use high-tech electronic video gear in their ritual room to interact live with those European Satanists. Okay. I mean, I don't know what to make of this. What does everybody make of this? If this is a true account, has this judge just gone completely off the deep end? I mean, it wouldn't be the first judge that this happened to. I mean, is there some kind of truth in what he's saying and then that made him paranoid and completely mental? And then he kind of spiraled out of control and embellished a lot on all of this stuff? Because obviously a certain base layer of corruption, there's obviously corruption out there. I mean, coincidence theorists, authority-worshipping cultists, they might deny that there's any kind of corruption in police or the justice system or politicians, but obviously there's a certain amount. Now, the exact amount is what's really in question. Is it truly completely widespread? I wouldn't claim it is. I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say it's not, because if everybody was in on it, it would be way too obvious. There needs to be a certain amount of useful idiots and incompetents, maybe a lot of kind-hearted people that are also useful idiots. I don't know if it's this widespread, but it is. I mean, yeah, this is like an 80s movie plot from some like B movie where they just went completely overboard. But can we apply the truth is stranger than fiction here? I mean, could someone really make all this stuff up? I mean, I don't know. More about Satanism. I told Judge Long that in 1999, I was illegally fired from a municipal job in Redacted. He immediately said, that's a dirty little city. I had hard evidence of perjury against my false accusers, along with the merits of the case in my favor, but Hunter's DA office refused to prosecute. Bill listened intently as I told him that two private attorneys refused the case, one being the local ACLU representative, who I actually hadn't even asked to take the case, and another attorney who suspiciously reviews the case for 4 days after he said he liked it, this type of case being his advertised specialty. Bill nodded in agreement to my suggestion that both attorneys were given bribes to not take such an easy case against an entity with lots of hidden money. He said, quote, about $5,000 would be the norm for that sort of payoff bribe, plus they won't get psycho-satanically attacked as they would if they took the case, Bill said. Hunter and company easily got $15,000. Your unemployment judge probably got $5,000, and the same for each of the EEOC judge. The state senator gal who snitched my testimony to her back to Redacted got $5,000. Appeals is where the real money is, at least 10 a pop and up past 40. How do you think Monsanto wins all those ridiculous lawsuits? I told Bill details that suggested that I was attacked with satanic activity over the matter. Per my details, he confirmed that I was psychically, satanically attacked. I told him that the new head of public works who illegally fired me was just in from California. With that, he said Sacramento has one of the most notorious stables of mercenary satanic psychics in the West. I hear that former KGB... Okay, yeah, I mean, come on. I should have JR on for this episode. Now they're bringing in KGB psychics. Like, what does everybody make of this? Is this really The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, or is this just a hodgepodge of bizarre sci-fi and conspiracy and horror satanic elements? What do all the Mindshock listeners think of this? Again, I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue, but once you bring in KGB psychics, it gets tough. Not because KGB psychics don't exist. I mean, there's actually documented evidence of the Soviet Union experiments into psychokinesis and a lot of different psychic activity with psychics and all of this stuff. But just the fact that it's brought in here, I mean, it's a little weird. I hear that former KGB psychics like the climate there. I wonder what their fees are, probably somewhat reasonable. It would be hard for you to compete with 40 grand or so in bribes working against you behind the scenes. Plus what they paid the satanic psychics, Bill advised. Don't bother to go after them anymore. Just figure that what goes around comes around, and they'll just get their just desserts without you lifting a finger. That's a little weird that he said that, though. Like, I would like to know his thoughts on, like, karmic scales in the universe. Like, why would he say that they would get their just desserts after he just outlined this, what's supposedly a completely vast and corrupt system? Your ball game is long over. The umpires wear the same uniforms as the home team. He claimed that other top dark cities are Boston, Chicago, Miami, and LA. They're everywhere, and they're thick in Denver and Colorado Springs, too. The retired judge said that he'd never talked to someone who was conscious about being a victim of satanic psychic attack. My awareness of that came later. For that, he said he would buy me my next cup of specialty coffee. I told him that I would like a mocha latte right now. He handed me a $5. I returned some change to him and enjoyed the drink. Judge Long said that whistleblowers are always made out to be kooks and nuts, and all of that is directly from satanic psychic attack on the whistleblower and his potential supporters, and to some extent on the public. How they get away with it all, for the most part, is to call the other guy nuts and use the satanic attacks to make them afraid to stand up for themselves and to make mistakes and look foolish. Whistleblowers are always hit hard with smear campaigns that always seem to get into the press over and above any truth in the matter. I mean, that's a good point. News media honchos get their hush payola too when they're needed. Actually, it's a form of tampering with the jury pool. The defense is limited as to what they can say about the press, but the prosecution has free rein to front load a jury pool. They choose juries with their Satanism, picking the easily influenced people. Bill said that mercenary satanic psychics are now deeply involved in the professional and college sports world. He said, just look at the dynasty teams for the first clue. Many teams have their own staff of attack psychics. Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Florida, UCLA, Arizona, Connecticut, the usual suspects. He said, notice that the Patriots started winning after 9/11, suggesting that there was federal assistance with some kind of sports satanic psychics. I've noticed that New England Patriots coach Belichick is good friends with Coach Donovan of U of Florida basketball, recently winning 2 NCAA championships. Some star pro athletes will hire their own to attack their personal opponents. Judge Bill was convinced that Roger Clemens used satanic psychics to attack the batters that he faced, as Clemens is always a foul-mouthed creep, never a gentleman, and not able to hide his involvement with that crap. Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, wow, that'll get some pearl clutching. Sports psychics were pretty much proved to me when the Red Sox strangely controlled the Rockies in the 2007 World Series. Note, March 20th, 2014, the Colorado men's basketball was embarrassed in their NCAA tournament game. Post-game, one CU player commented, "We came out there at the start unfocused." This is exactly what Judge Bill described as a typical result of sports satanic psychic attack. Bill speculated that the expansion of dirty psychic activity, especially in sports over the past decade or more, may be due to the Russian KGB-trained psychics now being allowed to leave Russia. One coffee clutch attendee reminded us that Khrushchev said that America will collapse from the inside. We threw this around the table for speculation and eventually concurred that any influx of KGB-trained psychics is probably not a focused political attack, but just the quest for higher income by the individual former KGB psychic agents. We agreed on the opinion that if any country were to attack us with mass psychic attack activity, that would be China. Carol and I have encountered plenty of Russian and Chinese agents in our Organite field work over the years, but her sense was that they were all clearly working for and or with the NSA, CIA, and FBI. Judge Long confessed that he was allowed to be a municipal judge because it was understood that he may be called upon to throw a case now and again. Bill said he was speaking to us about all of this now because to be appointed as a county or district judge, one has to have proficiency with satanic dark arts. He said that he turned down an offer to be a county judge because he turned down the requirement to get involved with Satanism. Satanic judges know you're off balance and out of sync in court because of the Satanism that's directed at you. Quite often, they repeatedly interrupt you, illegally suppressing your testimony. It happens every day, all day long, if they sense that they can get away with it, all to get more money out of you plus the power aspect. They are a cult for power and money, he added. Those retired satanic judges and prosecutors aren't likely to hang around coffee shops and chat with the old boys. They need to hide because up close, their Satanism can be felt, detected, especially if you've been a victim of their Satanism. They can only socialize with each other. God-loving, honest people make them nervous and jittery. I've seen that a number of times. He felt that the Satanism has gotten increasingly more recognizable by the public in recent years, partially shown by the advent of scans beyond mere metal detectors in courthouses saying the Satanists get armed guards and you get a cavity search. This expanding security state we're experiencing is a convenient cover for the growing exposure of Satanism that's used by almost every authority and power structure you can think of. Courts and officialdom make poor light of real psychics because good psychics have the ability to more readily detect Satanism and can see how deeply entrenched it is in officialdom in our country. I'm told that psychics are always a target of satanic groups. That makes sense. He said that the larger prosecutor offices are just apprentice-type training grounds for Satanism for future judges. He considered all that to be vile voodoo beyond belief and treason against all human beings. Bill said that his contacts on this specific issue showed a lot of patience in explaining all this until he understood it. He was told that quantum science scratches the surface of this, but that it doesn't really get it. It is will and intention with dark arts that manipulates world issues and local issues with the specific placement of Satanists in authority positions who know specific satanic details that quantum scientists seem to be distracted from. This is why psychics are always a big target, because they have the best potential to see through the Satanism better than the distracted quantum people. I told Bill that I knew of a 2006 incident in Boulder in which Boulder detectives, not uniformed police, apprehended a Native American medicine woman who was visiting from South Dakota. She was taken to a police station where all her clothes were taken and she sat naked and alone in a room for 2 hours. Then 2 uniformed policemen without their badges and name tags entered the room and tortured her with handheld electric stun guns. All threatened charges against her were never filed. Her pet dog nearly died of dehydration while interred at the Boulder Humane Society. Bill hung his head, drank his coffee, and refused eye contact for a while. He said that he had heard of the incident. With the recent revelations of the illegal intrusiveness of the NSA and cell phone tracking capability, I'd bet her movements were monitored even locally. Stingray, suitcase-sized cell tracker, ? We spoke of 9/11. Bill said that we were spending a couple $1 trillion on something that couldn't be proven in a court of law and would certainly be disproven if legally challenged. He was well aware of the push to build a UNOCAL pipeline across Afghanistan to get Caspian Sea oil and natural gas marketed to China and India. When I called the event the Great Bamboozle, he said that it was the best polite term that he had heard about this event. Bill had met with a woman from India who has an uncle back in the old country who was receiving political perps for a new oil pipeline running across his land. This branches off the new pipeline that comes through Pakistan and Afghanistan from the Caspian Sea area. The grandson of one coffee clatcher knows an Indian college student whose father is a new hire at a refinery per the new pipeline. To an Indian refinery, a big one. Judge Bill knew of the increase in Afghan heroin production and estimated that it has probably multiplied at least sixfold since the start of the Pentagon's occupation. He said that it appears that we have lost our country and that the Afghanistan occupation is Vietnam all over again, but worse, and it will likely last indefinitely in some form or another. Bill claimed the Pentagon's Afghan heroin program is still not as grand as the CIA's decades-long South American cocaine operations. He had met an Army Special Forces veteran who had been assigned to a special unit at Fort Benning, Georgia. The unit assigns detachments for 6 months deployment to South America, where their mission is to search and destroy any small cartels that compete with the large cartel, the CIA. This isn't the first empire to prosper from illicit drugs. Take their money and keep them stupid. Judge Long said that it would be a safe bet that only U.S. GIs getting killed in Afghanistan are the unlucky ones who get assigned to protect the oil and gas pipelines or the heroin operations, saying that if they can lie about the World Trade Center, then they can lie about a few murders overseas. Bill noted that the Pentagon bought all the press rights out of Afghanistan before the bombing started on October 7th. Bill claimed that he sensed in advance that Hillary would get the State Department in 2008. It's state DOD and the CIA who brings drugs into this country. Hillary has been an international drug dealer since she was a governor's wife. Big Satanist, too. Bill said that the Grand Bamboozle is sadly defining life in America, commenting on how much power over civilization is held by the international pirates of natural resources, he said. Civilization is quickly digressing, with America at the forefront of the digression. One Coffee Clutch attendee asked Bill if psychic dark arts were used in the 9/11 Grand Bamboozle and the official story of it all. Judge Long replied, "What do you think? It's probably off the charts. Real evidence has been hidden or destroyed, and witnesses have been silenced from day one." With that statement, I told Bill and 5 others that I was on the website of U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone on the Friday afternoon of the day that his small plane went down. I clicked itinerary on his site and found that on the following Tuesday, 9:30 a.m., the senator was going to open its own investigation of Enron. Enron had a major interest in gas-fired electricity generation plant in Pakistan on the path of the pipeline. It was later bought by Bechtel and GE, who were the building contractors on the project. A number of times we spoke of contrived shootings like the ones which have recently made the front page of the news. Bill reminded us that in 1976, an NSA official testified to a congressional committee that they, the NSA, have shooters on the shelf, referring to subjects who are psychically programmed with multiple personalities which can be revived by the programmers at any time. Manchurian Candidate style. He wished he had kept a copy of that testimony which a judicial friend had shared with him, because it may be harder to dig up now. In parentheses here, the church hearings, question mark. Is this relating to the church committee? I mean, that would be curious. After he first spoke of this, he later said that the official papers have just been released that further admit to federal psychically trained assassins. He said to notice how all the shooters end up dead at the scene, or at least kept from local investigative scrutiny. Twice I heard Judge Bill say that he hopes to live long enough to see the UN NSA planned phony UFO landing at Denver Interplanetary Airport. He said, for such an event, the mind-numbing technology and psycho-Satanism will outdo even the 9/11 nonsense. I'm told that somehow the Pope will be involved in this fiasco. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, obviously the coincidence theorists will say this is all jumping the shark, but Operation Bluebeam and this fake alien invasion, Bill Cooper even talked about that many years ago. A lot of what the judge is saying here is lining up with established conspiracy theory. Not that it's true, but again, it's kind of, it's definitely out there. But again, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. I'm not going to hallucinate and claim to have any kind of top secret clearances like, the Dunning-Kruger crowd, the gullible coincidence theorist, authority-worshipping masses. They hallucinate that none of this could ever be true. But if they don't have these top-level clearances, how would they know either way? That's kind of the point here. How would they know either way? That's kind of the point here. Bill said that this is planned for after the federal government moves to Denver and the Colorado Front Range, which he said he does not want to be around for. He said, quote, it'll be under emergency conditions and dirty as hell. Watch for Obama to already be out west when it happens, California, I'm told. His contact told him what's on the table right now as the reason for the move to Denver is a few planned earthquakes in eastern U.S., maybe with a category gazillion hurricane. Our Air Force, wow. A category gazillion hurricane? Are they referring to some recent hurricanes in Florida? Our Air Force does weather control, but I'm told that Russia is the best on the storm stuff and that they're for hire. The whole affair will be one very well orchestrated grab for martial law. He said it is a push to get all the world's military under the control of the UN, single world currency. Also, I'll be praying for the lot of you from my grave. Good luck. Bill claimed that when this happens, agents from a couple of intel agencies will move into the buildings north of the Boulder police station, which now house a small biotech firm. He said that the empty business park just east of Longmont Humane Society has long been saved for a gaggle of federal agencies. The governor has never moved into the governor's mansion. An 8-apartment condo complex is now being built within walking distance of the Boulder police station. This big one right next to the railroad. There's a new motel there, too. So Judge Long died in 2010. So even though this comment was made on YouTube 2019, allegedly, if this is true, that means he's saying all this prior to 2010, which is kind of crazy. Be wary of quarantines on the Fed-controlled Front Range based on faulty data. Outright lies, actually. Quarantines. Judge Long said that there's a former military intel guy who speaks about how world events are known about well in advance because the events are fabricated and further orchestrated for the taking of resources and the manipulation of mass opinion for unspoken permission to bypass the U.S. Constitution and other specific statutes. He said to internet search for John Moore. Bill said that there was a recent 2009 obscured news report that the mother-in-law of the new president was just caught doing African voodoo in the White House. This gal would be a perfect fit for Denver, he said. He said it was called Sinatra or Santeri or something like that. Is he talking about Santeria? He smirked and shook his head. It's remarkably clever that Nairobi is a sister city of Denver. I'm told that the feds have full plans to expose Obama as an African on their chosen timing. It's been a setup from the start. Why? Well, they wouldn't give me that detail. When I commented that there seems to be a grand treason underfoot, they replied, Americans will feel as if they don't have a country. He said that a sizable portion of his information comes from a former CIA agent who is employed at McGuckin's hardware store. Wait a second. Is that the hardware store that Patsy Ramsey went to that people were trying to get receipts for that got charged for that? Bill said that there are a handful of former federal agents employed there, 3 in the Woodstove Corner, and a few dozen more of them in the area. This local collection of semi-retired federal agents have something to do with all of the federal science stations here up and down the Colorado Front Range, with the Department of Standards being the recipient of this assemblage of agents. And then I'd bet that Intel is behind all this. He didn't know what the major reason for this is, other than that the Department of Standards would know the major scheme of it all. He said this has been going on since before 9/11, and I suppose they're laying the groundwork for the federal government to move here. After that last building addition by Standards, there's now underground housing for some 6,500 people. I'd like to know what that's all about, and where does money from all that come from? He quipped that Boulder police take marching orders from the local feds, and even more, they take advice from the DA's office. Bill said that the local IBM plant and the Northern Boulder Antenna Mesa have some very deep and dark federal connections, and that those installations are at least a part of the reason for the generous collection of active and former federal agents here. The local IBM push for early retirements in 1989 or so was designed to make more room for the NSA personnel. He mentioned the NSA as the actual operators of the Antenna Mesa north of Boulder, and that they control the NCAR outpost just east of Marshall, just south of Boulder, and that has a big antenna fence across the road from it. The antenna fence was built during a phony claim as a Superfund site, he said. Vile electronics, then refused to speak of any more details. I'm confident that our former coffee meetings would love the current saga of the NSA whistleblower leaks, and that Judge Long would lead the banter. He said the NSA gets better than $295 billion a year, with that master number split up and hidden in other programs and budgets. Bill said that it has been known since 1979 that if you don't want anything repeated to you, don't say it over the phone, which could suggest that the recent NSA phone data scandal is old tech. and that the current expose could be a distraction diversion away from something much bigger, or is merely a meme to suggest that you were hopelessly conquered. The NRO gets $108 billion a year. That's on their website. I've been inspired to put together my notes of retired Judge William H. Long's words for a peculiar reason. Some months ago, I gave a spare phone of mine to someone in need of one. He told me that 5 times when he used the phone in the first few days of having it, that the Boulder police have instantly shown up around him just after he used the phone. 2 of those times were when he had just called me. I believe that the local authorities have identified me as one of those who heard the late-life articulations of a frustrated, honest judge. In the past few years, since Judge Long has passed, on occasion my phone has drained as if I had been using it. I asked around about this. One person got back to me saying he had asked someone who would know about it. That person said that my phone was being hacked. I was being listened to, and or nasty frequencies were being broadcast to you. It may happen a few times per month or sometimes not for a month or more. And the last quote here, the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Just let it loose. It will defend itself. From St. Augustine. So, I mean, did anybody actually think would be going this far down the rabbit hole in the Jonbenet Ramsey case? So now, in typical Mindshock fashion, we'll be continuing the rabbit hole in the branch off to Nancy Krebs' testimony, which I believe is what the judge referred to here to Alex Hunter, who happened to resign or retire within weeks of this testimony, which is also coincidental, I guess. And this will lead us to, of course, Fleet and Priscilla Whites, the Whites who we just covered briefly in the early episodes, and we'll be continuing to examine this rabbit hole. Okay, so this brings us to the infamous Nancy Krebs account. Now, obviously the hardcore researchers know about Krebs, but a lot of people who just have an overview of the Jonbenet Ramsey case, they may not know about the testimony of one Nancy Krebs. I believe this is who the judge is referring to as far as witnesses who came forward or testimony regarding all the corruption. But let's look at the official narrative, the coincidence theorist narrative. Obviously, how often is the official narrative turn out to be true? I mean, turns out not too often, but maybe it's true here. Again, I do not claim anything is true or untrue. So on the JonbenetRamsey.shoutwiki.com, here's just a quick overview of the official narrative, but it might still offer some clues. Nancy Krebs, a woman who claimed to have been raped by John Ramsey and Fleet White, as well as Fleet White's elderly father. I mean, how often does someone come out of the woodwork with these kinds of claims? If she was just looking for attention, would she have just kept it to John Ramsey and possibly Fleet White? Or just Fleet White? But she's also involving Fleet White's elderly father. That's an interesting detail there. Again, I'm not claiming anything she's saying is true, but it's interesting because in all these other cases, I mean, even against Trump, like a lot of the people coming out with allegations, I mean, they're not necessarily coming out against allegations against him and his friend's father and all this. I mean, it's one thing to come out with this for attention or whatever, but these kinds of details, all I'm saying is they might possibly warrant at least some kind of legitimate investigation. She claimed that John Ramsey had visited her in California when she was a young girl, chained her up, and sodomized her. She also claimed that John Ramsey had filmed these encounters and made money off of it, and that the Whites had held parties with large groups of pedophiles. Krebs also claimed that her own mother was present at the Whites' Christmas party on the night of Jonbenet's death. Krebs' allegations were thoroughly investigated and determined to be false. By who? By the people alleged to have been involved? I mean, this is what coincidence theorists don't understand. Again, I'm not claiming any of this is true. But when the guards investigate themselves, like, who will guard the guards? Like, if the people alleged of the crimes, if the accused investigate themselves and find themselves innocent, maybe they really are innocent. But all these gullible goofs out there, they don't understand what a conflict of interest is. Because if there is widespread corruption, as this judge is alleging, if that's true, again, I'm not saying it is, but if that's true, and there's something to these allegations, how would you expect these same people to find themselves guilty? I mean, you'd have to bring in I don't know, internal affairs, maybe? I mean, a non corrupt agency of some kind, an independent investigators, not associated. I mean, maybe even from another country. I mean, I don't know. Like, you can't, obviously, you're not going to have the guilty parties investigate themselves if they're all complicit. Now, again, a lot of people who doubt Nancy Krebs, individually, there might not be enough evidence, and I'm not saying even collectively there is, but when the people that just dismiss Nancy Krebs outright, if there's some form of validity or truth, however small, when you couple it with this other interview here or assortments of coffee table talks with this judge, if those are legitimate and they can be determined to be, it's very, very interesting that they kind of sort of match up here in some way about these parties. And again, rumors of this, there have been rumors of this going back a long time. Again, I'm not alleging they're true, but it's interesting because in other true crime cases, it turns out that early rumors were true. Again, I'm not saying that's the case here, but in other cases and other situations, the rumors just don't come out of the ether. They come from something. Police discovered that Krebs was the subject of a missing persons report from California and had claimed to be a witness in at least 2 other homicide investigations. Now, here's the thing. If she's involved in the criminal element and these circles of criminals and pedophiles and murderers, why? I mean, is it really? Like, if she's telling the truth, I mean, how does it discredit her if she's seen other crimes? If she's claiming to be involved in these circles of criminals and possibly some kind of black market snuff films and all this stuff, if those criminals are murderers, I mean, perhaps she was a witness in other. I mean, this is so weird, as if you're using that to discredit. I mean, maybe she wasn't. Maybe she made everything up. But to just dismiss it by saying, oh, yeah, she also claimed to see other murders. I mean, if a gang member comes in with info on murders and they also have info on other murders, I mean, it's not that surprising if they're constantly around murder, as they're claiming to be. Again, they might not be honest, but that, to dismiss it on those grounds, I mean, how silly can you get? Now, here are the wrinkles in the story. Support from DA Alex Hunter. Krebs' story was broken in the media in Boulder Daily Camera interview with then DA Alex Hunter. Hunter stated that Krebs' story was very believable and referred to it as a breakthrough in the case. Though he mentioned Fleet White by name, Hunter neglected to mention John Ramsey's role in the story. Prior to Hunter's public statements of support for Nancy Krebs, Fleet White had been an outspoken critic of Alex Hunter and had been campaigning for his removal from the DA's office, which is also curious. Police investigation of Krebs' claims. According to the police, Boulder police spent about 11 weeks investigating the allegations, which included conducting 22 interviews, reviewing medical and psychological records, reviewing photographs and recordings, consulting with a forensic psychiatrist, and comparing the allegations against physical evidence with current knowledge of the case. As a result, Boulder police and prosecutors working on the case have concluded that other than the woman's statements, there is no evidence to support this theory of Jonbenet's murder. That's interesting, though, because that's an interesting way to phrase it as well, because that proof that it's not true? No, it is not. They're just saying they have no physical evidence to corroborate the story. They're not even necessarily saying she's not credible, but I mean, this was in a May 15th, 2000 press release, so this is fairly early on, within a few years she came forward, but Detective Steve Thomas, who had resigned from the case at that point, said it was unbelievable that Alex Hunter leaked and smeared Fleet White and his family with this story that has no grounds whatsoever. And again, even if there's zero corroborating evidence, that doesn't necessarily mean it's untrue. Obviously, you can't claim it is true, but if there's no evidence to the contrary. Prosecutor Mike Kane, who was working for Hunter's office, reportedly called Hunter's secretary, confused as to why Hunter had gone publicly with the claims, despite knowing that Krebs was a, in quotation, goofball. Here's the thing, though. If these notes from meetings with a judge have any kind of validity, if Hunter and all these other people are involved, and if they're even having disputes with each other over the flavor of satanic psychic attacks, I mean, yeah, it's really weird. It's difficult to make heads or tails of all this without falling for logical fallacies. I mean, obviously the Dunning-Kruger crowd, the authority-worshipping cultists and coincidence theorists, they're going to grasp desperately for their appeal to incredulity logical fallacies. Like, with religious fervor, they're going to grasp them and hold on to them. But if we're not falling for logical fallacies, because if this is all true, and I'm not alleging it is, but if it is, how do you find out it's true? Because if you just dismiss it, and if it is true, you'll never find out. Fleet White commented on the Krebs fiasco in a 2014 radio interview. Quote, clearly the only reason that the Boulder Daily Camera printed the story is because Alex Hunter had endorsed her credibility, and that was certainly borne out later in our conversations with Daily Camera reporters, end quote. And you know, another weird thing is, like, if you're Fleet White, are you still giving interviews in 2014 over a 96 murder case? I mean, does anybody find that slightly weird, especially if you don't want to be in the public eye? I don't know what to make of that. Later in 2000, the Whites brought an action in district court to release all of the investigative records from the Krebs investigation. The court released the transcript of Krebs police interviews, but no other investigative files. So that's a curiosity on so many levels here. Because first of all, those that say, okay, if the Whites were guilty, why would they want a public release of all the records? Now, if they're innocent, they might want that to show that they're innocent, right? But if they're guilty, would they be fighting for a release? Again, maybe. It depends on whether the fix is in or not. They might also, some people allege they were just curious, as to what they had gathered on them. Because since the Whites hadn't been arrested for anything, they must have known that there was no actual damning evidence. But perhaps they wanted to get ahead of it, so they wanted it released so that way they can ensure that no real evidence would ever come to light. So that doesn't tell us a lot there, but just from the surface, you would think they probably wouldn't want it released. But then again, if there is an active cover-up and they want to stay ahead, perhaps they would want to release it. I don't know. But is it also curious that the court only released the initial police interviews, but no actual investigative files? So they don't know what was the result of any investigations, whether they found everything she said to be demonstrably false, or maybe they did find some kind of evidence to back this up, and they said they didn't. What would that prove? And the Whites went to district court again in 2014 to release all the investigative files. The Boulder Police Department and the DA opposed the release of those records. Does anybody else find this weird, though? Because if it really has no credibility, why not release them? I mean, it's just a little weird, unless they're thinking they're protecting Krebs, but if she was already supposedly discredited as a crazy person, why would it matter whether if they could at least back up the fact that they ruled her crazy, if that's what they did? I mean, none of this really makes any sense, no matter how you look at it. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, as recently as 2014... the Whites are going to district court and doing interviews? What does that mean? That is almost stranger than this whole crazy conspiracy theory to me. I mean, it's just so weird. Like, why are they still going on about this? So let's look at the Whites write-up on JonbenetRamsey.pbworks.com, the Jonbenet Ramsey Case Encyclopedia. Pretty good resource here. The Fleet White Jr. theory. Who is Fleet White Jr.? Fleet and Priscilla White were very close friends of the family with the Ramseys, in part because they had two children similar in age, Burke and Jonbenet Ramsey. So why do some suspect Fleet White motive? The predominant theory, articulated by self-proclaimed detective Keith Andrews, is that Fleet White may have been motivated by jealousy towards John Ramsey, but others think that Fleet White may have been a pedophile. Means, because Fleet White was a close family friend who knew Jonbenet well, most theories believe he was able to rely on this to get Jonbenet out of bed and into the basement without her being alarmed. Opportunity. The Whites lived only 1.2 miles or 4 minutes from the Ramseys, and had both a key as well as invited access to the house, both on the night of the December 23rd party and on the morning of December 26th. Many Fleet White theories make use of these in explaining how Fleet White was able to plan the crime and possibly covered up evidence or deliberately contaminated the crime scene. No other close friend of Ramsey's had quite the same degree of opportunity. That's a good point there. So we might not have a good motive, but means and opportunity, they seem to be there. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything either, but of all their friends, I mean, I still find the Steins a little bit unusual, and the Fernies, but again, I've gone over them in the neighborhood podcast episode, as well as going over the Christmas party guest list and all of that. But focusing here on the Whites, I might have to do a dedicated episode on the Whites just because there's actually quite a bit of information on their saga in relation to the Ramseys, falling out, whatever, and even more background info. But I'm just going to focus here just on this. Exculpatory evidence favoring Fleet White Jr. cleared by Boulder Police Chief on April 16th, 97, City of Boulder issued a press release stating, in response to media inquiries and to clarify inaccurate statements, Boulder Police Chief Tom Kobe has the following statement: Mr. and Mrs. Fleet White Jr. are not suspects in the Jonbenet Ramsey murder investigation. They are considered key witnesses. The Boulder Police Department appreciates the full cooperation they received from the Whites since the beginning of the investigation. I feel this response is necessary due to the inaccurate portrayal of Mr. and Mrs. White in certain media publications. No DNA match. Internet poster Jay Yells has deduced from documents shown in the Tracy documentary that Fleet White and Priscilla White have been cleared on DNA. And again, just constantly going back, nobody has been cleared with the latest gen technology. Rebuttal of Keith Andrews' theory. Internet poster Jay Yells has posted a point-by-point rebuttal of Fleet White did it theory promulgated by self-proclaimed detective Keith Andrews. We're not going to get into that. Incriminating evidence against Fleet White Jr. Timeline. Internet poster Mame has posted a timeline related to Fleet White. This is still a work in progress whose accuracy and completeness will improve over time. Another timeline has been posted here. Strange behavior following Jonbenet Ramsey's death. Self-proclaimed detective Keith Andrews has detailed numerous instances of odd or suspicious behavior by Fleet White in the aftermath of Jonbenet Ramsey's death. And even if all of this is true, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because if he didn't initially suspect John Ramsey and then he began to, that could possibly account for that as well. Again, we're not going to go into that now because we're kind of focused on the Nancy Krebs aspect. So the Nancy Krebs story. Nancy Krebs reported that as a child, she had been the victim of sexual abuse by distant relatives of Fleet White Jr. and his father, but also by John Ramsey. She further reported being prostituted for pornography. And I believe, was her earliest interview February 22nd, 2000? That is listed here, Detective Tom Trujillo. Nancy Krebs Police Department interview. So it's dated February 22nd, 2000. And there's another interview May 10th, 2000. And there's also, okay. So an internet poster known as Logan apparently looked through the California sex offender registry and he found a Johnny Ramsey. He stated this: I believe Uncle Johnny Ramsey was the child molester registered on the California sex offender registry. He was in California during the time Nancy Krebs mentioned. Okay, so was this a different John Ramsey? So, I mean, wow. Yeah, so he's listed in the register as Johnny Ramsey, but the middle name is B, and his date of birth listed here is June 21st, 1959. So apparently it is a different John Ramsey, because even though they have the first initial, the middle name is the same. Jonbenet's father, apparently, his listed birthday is December 7th, 1943. So, yeah, this is why, again, things aren't necessarily a black and white logical fallacy. It could be a false dichotomy. So if she was abused by the Fleet White the White family, Fleet White and his father possibly, and there's also another John Ramsey here, especially if she's in an extreme state of duress and as a child, she might not have recognized that it was a different John Ramsey. So let's look at a summary here because, I mean, it is a little bit disturbing. I don't want to go through point by point every word she said in her testimony, but just going over a summary here by Samar Candy on the Jonbenet subreddit. A woman's story of sex abuse. Nancy Krebs, DA pursues new Ramsey lead. Hunter asks police to investigate woman's story of sex abuse by Barry Hartman, camera staff writer, February 25th, 2000. DA Alex Hunter has turned over new information to Boulder Police and the FBI that he says could provide a major breakthrough in solving the 3-year-old Jonbenet Ramsey murder case. The information is from testimony and documents provided voluntarily by a 37-year-old California woman who was brought forward by Boulder attorney Lee Hill. The woman said she suffered a lifetime of sexual and physical abuse beginning at age 3. Her story, if true, could mean the Ramsey case is tangled in sex abuse and involves more people than originally thought. Hunter said he finds the woman to be very believable. Boulder police detectives, however, aren't so sure. Even if only 15% of what she says is true, Hunter said, this case warrants investigation, and if Boulder cops don't want to do it, I will take the case to the U.S. attorney. Police Chief Mark Beckner said Thursday, though our detectives did not find her to be credible, we are taking what she has said seriously. I'm interested in finding the truth no matter where it leads us. Beckner said the first thing his detectives will do is perform a thorough background check of the woman and meet with her therapist of 10 years in an attempt to corroborate her story. Hill, who is a former San Diego County deputy DA and former special assistant U.S. attorney and is experienced in investigative work, said, quote, she is among the most credible witnesses I have ever interviewed, end quote. So that's actually interesting that Hill, who's not from Boulder, Hill is from San Diego County, DA San Diego County, and a former special assistant U.S. attorney. So he's saying she's credible. He is representing the woman in her decision to give information to authorities. The woman has described to police years of sexual and physical abuse in California homes at the hands of adults who stayed at holiday and other parties after other guests had left for the evening. Then she said another party, one of sexual abuse for the gratification of a select group of adults, would begin. In talking to detectives, the woman draws parallels between sexual techniques used at those sessions and the physical evidence of garroting that investigators found on the body of Jonbenet Ramsey. The woman told detectives she believes Jonbenet was killed accidentally when the asphyxiation technique used to stimulate an orgasmic response during a child sex and porno party went too far. The woman told police she knows firsthand about asphyxiation choking to produce a sexual response because it had been done to her when she was a child. The woman said in her experience, little girls were dressed provocatively and trained to say provocative things such as, "It's a pleasure to please you." She told police when girls did not perform as expected, they were struck on the head. That was because their hair covered the wound. A big night for such parties was Christmas night, she said. Over the years, she said many parties were held then because a large number of cars around a house did not arouse suspicion in the neighborhood, and the children had a full week to heal from their wounds before returning to school. I mean, this is really dark stuff. If she did make it up, I mean, it's so disturbing at the logic. How, I mean, that is pretty logical. I mean, the amount of cars, the time off from school, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's just, I mean, it's, yeah, this is bizarre. Or maybe this all did happen to her, but she was mistaken that either John Ramsey was involved, or it was a different John Ramsey, a Johnny Ramsey, and that maybe it was, or maybe it was the Fleets, maybe it was Fleet White and his father, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was other people. Maybe she's mistaken about that. I don't know. Again, let's not fall for false dichotomies. Jonbenet Ramsey's death occurred overnight, Christmas 96. The autopsy report concluded she suffered a blow on the head and was strangled. The woman said she knows the Ramseys through the Fleet White family. She said the godfather to her mother is Fleet White Sr., 86 of California. Fleet White Jr. of Boulder and John Ramsey were close friends until the death of Jonbenet. White, or rather until the funeral, right? In the days their falling out was after the funeral. White Jr. was with John Ramsey when Jonbenet's body was found in the basement of the Ramseys' Boulder home. I mean, that's another red flag for many people. White Jr. has since been crusading for Hunter's ouster from this case for refusing to prosecute the Ramseys. Ramsey attorney Brian Morgan declined comment. Fleet White could not be reached Thursday. Police cleared White as a suspect in April 97. Attorney Hill said that the woman came forward because she was fearful for her life. She came to believe that people involved in child sexual abuse in California were becoming suspicious that she might try to talk with authorities. Hill said her main reason, however, was to try to save other innocent victims who can't speak for themselves from further sexual abuse. The woman and her therapist of 10 years, Mary Bienkowski, saw Hill being interviewed on Fox television about a deposition he had taken of John Ramsey in a libel suit against a supermarket tabloid. They decided to contact him. The camera's efforts to reach Bienkowski have been unsuccessful. Hill, struck by what he heard, traveled to San Luis Obispo near Los Angeles on February 11th. He spent 5 hours interviewing both the woman and her therapist, and he videotaped supporting documents, which included personal notes, cards, and family photographs that the woman says are from the Whites, both senior and junior. Hill recounted details of the interview. You know, it's also curious that the actual investigative files have never been released, only the interview. So what does that say? Is there evidence that that these people are all in the same photographs? Obviously, that's not evidence of any kind of an abuse, but it does lend some credibility that at least she knew all these people, and this part of a story might be true. Hill recounted the details of the interview to Hunter in a meeting February 16th. With him was Steven Singular, a Denver author who has pursued the Ramsey case for 3 years and is convinced the killing is linked to child sexual abuse. Both men expressed to Hunter intense frustration about the reluctance of police to consider evidence that deviated from their theories. The woman called Hill again Saturday, and he arranged for her to fly to Denver. He picked her up at 12:30 a.m. Sunday at Denver International Airport and found safe housing for her. Is that a weird time to fly into an airport? Midnight, after midnight. Hunter immediately, unless it was that was the first time he reached out. I mean, I don't know. Or she called him, and what time did he call? So if she called him and wanted to come as soon as possible, I guess maybe that's not weird. Hunter immediately tried to arrange for detectives to interview the woman. 2 detectives interviewed her at 3 p.m. Tuesday for nearly 5 hours. It was during that interview that Hill learned Boulder police had received a missing persons report on the woman. A relative of the woman filed the report with San Luis Obispo authorities, who called Boulder police. Boulder police, Hill said, responded that she was in Boulder and would be interviewed by detectives at 3 p.m. Tuesday. They also told San Luis Obispo police she was with Lee Hill. I couldn't believe it, Hill said. We had told police her life was in danger, and they tell everyone where she is and what she is doing. That is kind of insane. I mean, does that in and of itself, regardless of whether she's credible or not, the fact that people are afraid of what she might say, is that proof of some kind of wide conspiracy going all the way to California as well? I mean, this is all insane. Police Chief Beckner said he thought it was his department's responsibility to respond to the missing persons report. Hill says police should have asked the witness whether she wanted them to respond. So she's an adult. She's 37 years old, and someone filed a missing persons report? The Ramsey case has been quiet for the last several months following a 13-month grand jury investigation that prosecutors said did not find enough evidence to bring an indictment in the case. So, yeah, I mean, it is curious, because if she said Uncle Johnny, so is she not claiming that this particular John Ramsey? So she did not name John Ramsey. She named an Uncle Johnny who's a different John Ramsey at a different age. Here's another article. This is by B.J. Plaskett, Boulder journalist. Nancy Krebs by B.J. Plaskett, Daily Times Call in 2000. The Times Call, meanwhile, has learned that the woman's story includes allegations that when she was between the ages of 6 and 12 and living in California, she and another female child close to her age were taken on summer road trips up the West Coast by 2 adults. Those trips, the source said, included stops in Oregon, Washington, and Canada. It was during those trips, usually taken in August, that the woman and the other little girl were assaulted and photographed by other adults. According to the source, the trips usually went to the same towns and ended with the assaults by the same people each year. Those sites included small remote towns in both California and Oregon, the Times Call has learned. On one site was a remote ranch in Oregon where outbuildings were used as sets for pornographic films featuring children. According to the source, the woman's allegations also included the following. In addition to the female child taken with her on the summer road trips, the woman reported that 2 other children of similar age, a boy and girl, were also victimized by some of the same adults. The woman was assaulted during at least 1 trip to Nevada and at least 1 trip to Colorado. A family doctor once treated her for what was described as a mild bladder infection, but the procedure actually involved surgical repair of genital injuries. The same doctor reportedly saw other suspicious injuries, but never alerted authorities. And some people believe that's what's going on with Jonbenet Ramsey with all of the doctor visits. Many of the assaults reportedly took place at parties during the Christmas holidays. At these parties, the source said, you know what else is weird? If the dates are all documented, and all of these injuries are only occurring around Christmas time, what does that mean? Like year after year? Just Christmas or August, like the alleged dates in question, and no other times of the year? That's kind of weird. At these parties, the source said the sexual assaults usually began while the child was on the lap of a man dressed as Santa Claus. The Santa Claus character would begin the sexual contact by fondling the child before handing her over to the other adults. The woman was often introduced to adult men who were referred to as uncle, but they were not actually related to her. Those men invariably assaulted her, according to the source. The woman was often kept out of school around the holidays because of injuries and other trauma stemming from the assaults. She reportedly missed 45 days of school, much of it around Christmas, during one school year. When contacted Wednesday, Bienkowski said her patient did not come up with the stories after the 96 slaying of 6-year-old Jonbenet Ramsey. No, she did not, Bienkowski said. 99% of what this client told me and wrote down was documented before 1995. See, this is curious because now you have a therapist here backing her up. You have a DA who's convinced. You have a DA official who's and was also a U.S. Assistant attorney, convinced that she's telling the truth. And her therapist is also convinced. And supposedly there's all this documentation. None of it's been released, of course. Supposedly it exists. What do all of the devout coincidence theorists say about all this? Like they're all lying? I mean, did they? It's not like they released a book and went on talk shows all the time, did they? I mean, I don't recall that. If that is true, then okay, we can examine that. But if they didn't, I mean, this is all crazy. The woman making the allegations remains in hiding outside California. Her Boulder attorney, Lee Hill, has repeatedly said his client has been threatened and that he is concerned for her safety. And what would be his motivation to lie about all this? Assistant DA Bill Wise said on Monday authorities are taking the woman's claims very seriously. I mean, wow. This is crazy then. So she did not claim it was John Ramsey. She claimed it was Uncle Johnny, who's not, and there is a Johnny Ramsey on the child sex offender list in California. So that backs her up as well, if it's the same guy. Again, I don't know. You know the other thing that's weird? Everybody's accusing her of being completely crazy and insane. Doesn't she have a right to be kind of crazy after being if what she's saying is true? Would you expect her to be a well-adjusted, completely sane individual? That's another thing. Like all these coincidence theorists, authority-worshipping cultists, these mentally weak Dunning-Kruger goofs who are too mentally weak to even consider the possibility that there's bad people in the world and there are conspiracies. They're just too mentally weak to consider the possibility that it is true, so they just want to write her off as crazy. Now, maybe she is crazy, but how does that disprove any of the claims that she's making? This is Mindshock. I don't claim anything is true or untrue, but it's kind of weird. Like all of these Dunning-Kruger coincidence theorists just hallucinating to know for sure that not only is she lying, she's certifiable. I mean, it's weird. Like why is this conflation done? Why is this false dichotomy always engaged where, oh no, she's crazy? Well, how not crazy would you expect someone to be if the story is true? That's the real question is. And why is her therapist and this DA, like, she was able to hoodwink? Like, why are they just saying she's the most credible? There's all this evidence and documentation of all her claims prior. So she didn't know. So if this is all prior to Jonbenet Ramsey's death, obviously she wouldn't know that Fleet White would have been involved in that. So if she's just making these claims about the White family and these other people, she has no idea that in the future Jonbenet Ramsey would be killed and Fleet White would be a friend of John Ramsey. So she wouldn't know that, obviously. Yeah, I mean, this is really, really difficult. If all her claims about the garroting and all that, if that's all documented before 1995 as well, what does that mean? More details here. So, supposedly, John Ramsey's best friend was Fleet White. While Fleet was growing up, his father was molesting little girls with a garrote. So this is a comment by Troy on Quora. No one is saying that Fleet had anything to do with JonBenet's murder. However, Nancy Krebs said that her niece visited the Whites just before JonBenet's death. Nancy Krebs' niece also had a history of being abused with a garrote by Fleet's father. If JonBenet and Burke were playing with a garrote, it is possible that the use of a garrote was a topic of conversation among the children, and it became the source of information for the choking game. When the police tried to interview the niece, she left the country. Okay, what does all this mean, though? Because if Nancy Krebs claimed this about her niece, she's fearing for her life. Her therapist backs her. This DA from California backs her. They try to verify the story, and her niece leaves the country. I mean, that's kind of weird. Clearly, there's a lot of people here fearing for their lives. So let's go more into Krebs' account here. 2kinvestigations.wordpress.com has this write-up, The Nancy Krebs Saga Separating Fact from Fiction, Part 1. By The Professor. Posted January 27th, 2022, so quite recent here. One of the most perplexing and mysterious episodes of the Jonbenet Ramsey saga was the case of Nancy Krebs, a California woman who came forward and made explosive claims against the family of Fleet and Priscilla White. This became one of the most vehemently debated subjects on the case, with some dismissing Krebs as a psychologically disturbed woman and nutcase. Well, here's the thing, though. If what she's saying is true, wouldn't she be expected to be such? I mean, I just can't let that go, because, it's just such a weird concept that coincidence theories just can't grasp. And others saying that she deserved to be heard. Below, I have provided a brief summarization of the events surrounding the Krebs saga. I encourage you to draw your own conclusions. The following information was obtained from police interview transcripts, the Whites' public statements, and other open source methods. No media publications were relied on. The reader should remember that while some of Nancy Krebs' claims regarding the Ramsey case and her own sexual abuse were never proven to be true, there is, however, a lot that can be corroborated. Background: Nancy Krebs contacted Boulder-based lawyer Walter Leon Lee Hill after seeing him on television discussing the Ramsey case. Hill was commenting to reporters about how strange it was that the Boulder police did not want to see his deposition of John Ramsey. Hill had filed a lawsuit against John Ramsey and the National Enquirer on behalf of a Boulder photographer named Stephen Miles. Hill decided to represent Krebs and bring her to the attention of the Boulder authorities. The events that followed were not only strange and frightening, but at times extremely confusing. Hill and Denver-based journalist and author Stephen Singular met with District Attorney Alex Hunter and his office's chief investigator Linda Wickman on February 15, 2000. Hill stated that his witness had a lifelong relationship with the White family that could be proved, and she had information regarding child sexual abuse activities that could send the Whites to prison along with many other people. Hunter pressed both men for details, raising questions about potential motives, locations of where alleged crimes had occurred, and other areas of interest. Hill said that Fleet White Sr., father of Ramsey friend Fleet White Jr., had offered his witness $75,000 to keep her mouth shut and come visit him in Aspen, Colorado. Singular brought, and again, wow, this is pretty crazy. Singular brought up multiple aspects of the case that he believed warranted further investigation. He was entertaining the possibility that Jonbenet had been perhaps killed outside of the home and then returned to one or both parents. Singular also encouraged Hunter's office to look into Chris Wolf again, because he may have information about the crime and its perpetrators, even if he himself was not directly involved. Singular then theorized that Jonbenet may have been killed in the presence of three people, one being Fleet White Jr., a second man who was a videographer in the Boulder area, and a third man who was the actual killer that did not reside in the area. With all of these sensational and unproven possibilities being presented to him, Hunter agreed to move forward. You know what's weird? I mean, we've been going over the theory that perhaps Jonbenet Ramsey died earlier than alleged and possibly at a different location since the beginning. Would it explain some of the oddities in the case? But continuing on here, facts: Fleet White Sr. did own a property in Aspen, Colorado. Chris Wolf has no alibi for the night of the murder. Chris Wolf's girlfriend did suspect him of being involved in Jonbenet's killing. The physical and forensic evidence does not indicate Jonbenet was killed outside of her home. I mean, I don't know how they determined that definitively either way, though. But anyway, February 22nd, 2000, Lee Hill, Nancy Krebs, Alex Hunter, and detectives Trulio and Heidel sat down for a formal interview. Krebs presented the photographs in her possession and correctly identified all members of the White family. She then presented a letter from Nyla White, wife to Fleet White Sr. and mother to Fleet White Jr., that had been sent to Krebs' own grandmother. The detectives then commenced the background portion of the interview. Krebs stated that she knew the Whites since she was 3 years old, and they were friends of the Krebs parents and grandparents. The detectives then turned their attention back to the letter from Nyla and noted that there are some subtle things going on here. Krebs states that when she neared the age of 4, Fleet White Sr. began to sexually assault her. Krebs then states that Lanny White, daughter of Fleet Sr. and Nyla, and sister to Fleet White Jr., was also present during the assaults. Krebs states that she believes Fleet White Jr. as a minor was made to do things to me. Krebs states that Fleet Sr. last assaulted her in August 1980, and that Fleet Jr. last assaulted her sometime between 1976 and 1978. The detectives then produced a photograph of a man's mugshot from California, and Krebs correctly identifies him as Mackie Boykin, a man who pled no contest to sexually assaulting her. Krebs then presents the will of her grandmother's second husband, which was witnessed and signed by Fleet Sr. and Nyla White. Krebs then makes a very interesting comment that is corroborated by her photographic evidence. She states that when she was younger, she had blonde hair and a slender body similar to Jonbenet. Facts. Krebs states that the last time Fleet White Jr. sexually abused her was sometime between 76 and 79. Fleet White married Priscilla Brown in 1979. The letter from Nyla White to Krebs' grandmother further corroborates the two families' connections. The last will of Krebs' grandmother's second husband being signed by Fleet Sr. and Nyla White indicates trust and closeness between the two families. Krebs possessing family photographs of the Whites and being able to identify them by face indicates proximity and familiarity to and with them. Krebs having knowledge of Laney White being Fleet White Jr.'s sister, again, indicates having knowledge of the White family. An interesting comment here by Eagerly Waiting. Okay, so apparently this was not published. It states here this article was published January 27th, 2022, but comments are from June 2021, so maybe it was updated, but whatever. Eagerly Awaiting posted this. Thank you for your information. I've read that Nancy Krebs was found to be an unreliable source. Exactly, but who decided this and why? That's a very good question. She apparently was credible enough to put a pedo in prison based on her testimony a few years earlier. Can you imagine how different the case would have turned out if Nancy had not been dismissed? Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that is a great point. So, an interesting thread here on the Jonbenet Ramsey subreddit, on the Jonbenet subreddit, regarding this article that I just read. Young Girl Mac posted, honestly, the Krebs interviews by police also struck me as credible, and a lot of what she said checks out. Years later, some local municipal judge referenced 7 men that were there with Jonbenet when she died in a deathbed confession. His last name was Morris, and I think a former InfoWars reporter named Ryan picked up the story about the judge. Affectionate Fly posted this. That article from Wickman about the conversations between Singular, Hill, Krebs, the counselor, and the Whites was quite a find. Does anyone know the complete list of people who attended the Christmas party? Nancy says that her mother had a sexual relationship with John Ramsey and that her mother was at the Christmas party. WTH, so much is redacted, I wish we knew what was written, and it would be great to have other similar sources like Wickman's. The question was posed, why would John cover for White if he knew he was involved in the murder? The answer was that John was also culpable. I could go on and on about this post. It's left me with more questions than answers. See, this is a good point, though, because if a situation like this is the truth, does it explain all of these insane anomalies and why people don't blow the whistle on each other, all intertwined in Boulder PD, judge connections, all these political connections, and possible ring of some kind of satanic enterprise of some sort. Another post from this site here. I guess crime scene isn't the right word for it. Perhaps cover-up scene is better. Like you, I think they were there in the early morning helping stage a crime scene at the Ramsey home to make believe that she had been killed there when it actually happened elsewhere. You know what just occurred to me, too, from the 911 call? If Burke is in the background and they're saying, what did you find? If there's a mass staging involving the Whites as well, I mean, is it something innocent, like Burke left a toy out or broke a toy or did something bad and he thinks is there a way to explain away Burke in the 911 call if he's not responsible for Jonbenet Ramsey's death in any way? Because if it's a situation like that, I mean, that could be an explanation there. So, yeah, to make everyone believe that she had been killed there when it actually happened elsewhere. They either left and were called right back in keeping up with the cover story, or perhaps they never really left at all. In any case, I do think that part of their reason for the Whites, Fernies, Hoverstock, and Dr. Buff wanting to be there into the late morning, early afternoon before Jonbenet was found is that they wanted to have an explanation if any forensic evidence linking them to the staged crime scene turned up. There could have been other reasons too, like handling Patsy. We definitely do have different thoughts on Linda Arndt. I'm curious, what makes you think she wasn't honest? Personally, I feel like she was one of the few honest cops in Boulder PD who were honest, which is why her reputation was destroyed the most out of anyone there. She had what I thought was a good instinct about John Ramsey and also extended her suspicion to everyone else in the house when she noted that no one but her seemed to care about 10 a.m. passing with no phone call. Plus, she even reported fearing that her life was in danger from high-level officers in the BPD like John Eller and Tom Kobe, which is very telling. I think she was hung out to dry that morning by the police department and made to handle a crime scene entirely on her own, with tons of people milling about, despite repeatedly calling for backup. Okay, I mean, we are so far into Mindshock land here. I mean, my brain is starting to rattle because if this theory is true, and I'm about to introduce a new McGuire theory. I have my previous McGuire theory where the parents thought Burke did it, but he didn't, and they're innocent in all this. This is McGuire theory 2. Everyone is complicit. If there is some kind of satanic ring or whatever's going on here with all of these corrupt officials, is it really plausible that Boulder PD is really this inept and incompetent? Does it make more sense that Arndt was intentionally left out to dry, as this comment is stating here? Does that make more sense knowing that the scene was completely compromised and contaminated by all these parties? And if the upper echelons of Boulder PD are somehow connected to this conspiracy and where some of their members might have been present or at least know about this ring of these so-called elites that like to engage in this type of activity, they know this is never going to be solved, so they just throw Arndt out to dry. And they intentionally botch the whole thing knowing it'll never be solved. I mean, that's the new McGuire theory, because does that make the most sense? Now here's the new aspect of the McGuire theory too. Is it possible people connected to Ramsey or Boulder PD, whatever, is it possible that they anticipated, I'm not clear on the timeline here, because obviously it's impossible without knowing more information, but is it plausible? I mean, what if they suspected? I mean, this is so hard to really go down these rabbit holes because, again, I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue here. Is it possible if they foresaw Jonbenet Ramsey possibly being killed or at least injured severely through these parties, is it possible, or I don't know what the timeline is, maybe it was after she was dead, is it possible they actually contacted or made it to look like the Pew theory, where they involved the housekeeper, Pew, her husband, all of these criminal elements around Boulder, like Helgoth, Gygax, all these guys, were they the cover story? Was there some kind of contact made between certain entities and this ring? Pew, Gygax, Kennedy, Helgoth, made it to look like they could have been hired for some kind of kidnap job in order to cover up this illicit sex party where things went wrong involving Boulder PD or some kind of government officials of some kind. Would that check all the boxes? Would that account for all the variables? I'm just asking that question. I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. But that's McGuire theory number 2 at this point. After reading all of this and going down all these rabbit holes, I mean, is it really possible that there's this level of incompetence, or is it all by design? All of this conflation and obfuscation to ensure that this is never solved. Anyway, continuing this post here, Tal Jones is a very interesting character in all of this. He is the son of OSS and Army Intelligence Officer Albert Hedding Sprague, who ended up remarrying to Alice Kristoff, Nancy Krebs' mother, making Tal Nancy's step-uncle. Tal, who was living in Boulder, got involved in the Ramsey case from the beginning, joining the online forums to post primarily Burke did it theories as Spade. Per one account, Tal was working as a paralegal in the Boulder law office of Thomas Cecil Doc Miller, then boyfriend of Ramsey family friend Judith Phillips, and came into the office the day after Jonbenet's murder to announce that Fleet White had told him that Burke killed Jonbenet. Likely due to his association with Miller, Tal boasted of being well connected to the darker side of Boulder's political judicial network, which apparently involved drugs and blackmail. Now, you know what's crazy? I mean, does this all validate this alleged account from the judge? This is crazy. Tal even bragged about having Tom Haney, a former Denver cop who was assisting the Boulder police, as an inside source. When Nancy Krebs was considering coming forward, Tal was one of the people who approached her and tried getting her not to. His subsequent attacks on Nancy and continued pushing of Ramsey did it theory, largely Burke did it, narratives online made people see him as Fleet White's henchman of sorts. Reportedly, Alice even said at one point that she wouldn't be surprised if Tal or her stepson was involved in murdering Jonbenet. Now, how damning are these accounts if true? I mean, this is all absolutely insane. So here's a super random post from a blog, strangerinaJewishWorld.blogspot.com, from October 26, 2020, a look at Tal Jones. There is another character in the Jonbenet Ramsey murder mystery that I have not covered up to this point, and that is Tal Jones. I have not discussed him because I have not seen him as being really relevant to the murder, but after seeing his name come up a number of times in the research of other people, I guess it's time for me to do a post about him as part of doing due diligence in exploring every possible avenue of research that might shed better light on the truth. So in this post, I'll be doing my little expose on Tal Jones and how he fits into the big picture. Just who is Tal Jones and where does he fit in everything I've discussed about the Jonbenet Ramsey case on my blog? Talfrin Jones is the eldest son of Albert Sprague. Albert Sprague was the second husband of Alice Kristoff, so Tal Jones is Nancy Krebs' step-uncle and is Gwen Krebs Boykin's stepsister. You know, is this all too much coincidence for some people? I mean, that's awfully coincidental on how dialed in Nancy Krebs' step-uncle is in the Boulder scene. Tal Jones is nicknamed Spade by a lot of researchers for whatever reason. Tal Jones has been actively involved in spreading BDI posts on JBR forums. There is speculation that Tal Jones knows the Whites perhaps intimately. He also knows Nancy Krebs. Nancy Krebs said that Tal Jones is one of the people who tried to get her to keep quiet about her story and not tell it to Boulder officials. Now, an anonymous poster said, "Is it true that he is Fleet White's half-brother as well?" And if that's true, what would that mean? I mean, this is all crazy. This is all absolutely insane. By crazy, I don't mean untrue. Again, I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. It's just, see, there's a problem with a case that has this much evidence and is still unsolved. That means that it seems very possible that there's some variables we're not seeing, and therefore any theory would have to account for all these known and unknown variables in order to make sense. A Mindshock listener on the bigfooty.com forums, gg.exe, posted this, which is a curious comment that kind of sums up a lot of this shady business regarding all of this. It is very, very dark stuff here. I don't want to insert links to other blogs and forums too much on here. Don't want to break any site rules about such, but on the first page of the Professor's JBR thread, someone else posts a link to their own blog site covering the JBR case, and so I clicked that and started reading through it. It's very good, leans completely to a pedophile angle. Based on Nancy Krebs, or whatever her name is, who was there at the party, also 5 years of age, and says it was a sex party. That blog goes through evidence, rumors, and hearsay and connections to a pedophile network, Ramsey, Whites, and many others who share their children around type thing. Like the Professor's site goes into finding connections with all these people in Boulder, in and around the Ramsey network where pedophilia is rife. Going into Patsy herself, sexually abused by high-up military father. John Ramsey himself involved in shady things in the Philippines, etc. Anyway, to cut to the chase, from the others blog site was a link to a YouTube video about how a brand new last photo of Jonbenet Ramsey was recently released and why was it being held secret for so long. It shows Jonbenet Ramsey at the Whites' Christmas party, aka the sex party, wearing the outfit pretty much she was wearing when she was found dead. I don't know if that's true. And a distinctive hair tie she was wearing when she was found dead, photographed by the police at the crime scene. They also highlight how Patsy was wearing the exact same clothes that morning as what she was wearing the night before. No one does that. Her whole story was that they all came home, readied for bed, and went to sleep. Yet here we have Jonbenet Ramsey's last photo alive, showing she's in the same clothes and hair tie as her murder scene, and Patsy wearing the same clothes the night before. They also highlight how John once accidentally slipped up. Quote, "There were a lot of people here at 3 a.m., end quote, during the investigation or interview. And remember how John called his friends the circle of people involved at the party the night before. to come over when the ransom note was found. I actually can't find a source for that lot of people here at 3 a.m. quote, but... Also, someone commenting on the last photo mentions how obvious it looks like she's just finished giving oral sex to an adult. I mean, I don't see that as she could have just been crawling over a couch like kids do. I don't know. So the prevailing thought is that clearly Jonbenet Ramsey was killed that night during or after the sex party, either accidentally or premeditated, and everyone stayed around for a while to help cover up that party, get rid of photos, remove evidence, wipe things down, create a ransom cover story that her dead body at the Whites was transported to the basement later, etc. The only issue I have with all of this is Fleet White is a central figure to the story, but Fleet White reported he looked in the wine cellar at 8 a.m. and saw nothing, only for John to find Jonbenet Ramsey in the wine cellar at 1 p.m. Also, how White's wife got suspicious and upset with Patsy when she tried to claim the damage to the butler's pantry door was new, and how an intruder could have got in when White's wife knew the damage was there for ages before. Same with the broken window being initially said to be new, but was there since June. The Whites and Ramseys ended up breaking friendship, so did another family. As they grew suspicious, the family was lying about stuff. The blog site author does say something I wholeheartedly believe, though, quote, the staging of the Ramsey home was done by very intelligent but deceptive people for the purpose of pointing suspicion for the murder in as many different directions as possible, but away from the truth, end quote. I believe that because when I researched this through Mindshock and other sites, there are so many suspects, so much evidence that goes in many different directions that backs up an array of different overarching theories and possible suspects. To me, and as I posted on Mindshock's channel's episode 9, if he hasn't deleted that too, quick aside here, I do not delete comments. YouTube removes them for spam. So if your comment disappeared, just post it 2 or 3 times. I do not delete them. That is YouTube. So just continuing on here, there is so much of that in this case that can only point to being a coordinated collective effort to the murder and to covering things up, including the police. Whether by accident or not, whether the family or someone out for revenge on John for not doing something, there are dozens of sure thing suspects, all with their own smoking gun evidence. That means there isn't a solitary suspect, but a collective effort. Many people involved in various ways. A mastermind, a killer, a couple of lookouts, an info gatherer, someone to scope the house, someone to keep track of police and distract them, someone to help clean up the house and destroy crime scene evidence, take evidence secretly out of the house, etc. Okay. So as the McGuire 2 theory here, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't jump to they were all directly involved. It might be more likely, maybe, again, I'm not alleging this is true, that this circle, possibly not even the Ramseys, to protect all of this, whatever you want to call it, satanic ring of child abuse, they hired these lowly criminals. That way they would just possibly take the fall for it if certain evidence needed to be framed up as such, but mostly just to obfuscate and make sure it never got solved, because you have this just, the Pew Crew theory is just so weird on how a lot of this evidence seems to line up. But if that was all by design, does that make even more sense that these random, I mean, I don't know, it's a tough one. I mean, this case truly is one of the most mind-shocking cases ever. Marion number 1 also posted this. It seems likely to me that the whole drama of John Ramsey and Fleet White turning on each other was to save their own asses after they were put under the spotlight. Fleet probably figured he could deflect the attention away from himself by making it look like the Ramseys, particularly Burke, were the sole culprits, covertly using henchmen of his like Tal Jones and I suspect Thomas Cecil Doc Miller to push these narratives while assailing the Boulder DA's office for a cover-up protecting the Ramseys. John, conversely, has hinted at the guilt of every one of his former friends, especially Fleet, while acting as if the Boulder police have been conspiring against him and his family. Okay, see, that's another interesting point that doesn't get talked about. I mean, John Ramsey really did seem to throw everyone under the bus at one point or another, including the guy that sheltered him, Pasta J's co-owner. I mean, all of this is just so insane. But, I mean, how many cases has there been when someone literally burned every single bridge they had with all of these supposed people. Now, if they're all guilty of something, and is it possible that John Ramsey really is not guilty of anything involving his daughter, but he is involved in some kind of crime or corruption in these upper political circles, whether drug-related or business-related through Access Graphics, IBM, government contracts, whatever, that he's super dirty with all these other people, and he really did not pimp out his daughter, and all of this never happened, and he really did care about his daughter, but he clearly can't blow the whistle on all of this upper crime ring. Would that be a reason why he just threw everybody under the bus, because he just got so fed up with all of that, and he really wasn't actually guilty in what happened to his daughter directly? Is that a possibility? He's kind of hard to read. I mean, I do have to admit, he's pretty difficult to read. But I don't know if I could think of any other case where a parent of a murdered child behaved like he did. But continuing this comment here, or maybe it was even largely for show. Looking at their actions in tandem, it feels like John and Fleet were pushing equal and opposite narratives of the case, designed to force observers of the case to choose between two false narratives. Only one of the Ramseys did it, RDI, and everyone else is totally innocent, or an intruder did it, IDI, and the Ramseys are totally innocent. Maybe they were fueling an intentional false dichotomy. I like this guy's terminology, false dichotomy, logical fallacy right there, and laughing it up behind the scenes. You also have some weird actions where both sides appear to defend each other even after their apparent split. John denied under oath in the deposition for the Stephen Miles case that any altercation happened with Fleet in Atlanta, despite multiple witnesses and his own words in his own book he later published. Fleet and his wife initially backed Mary Keenan and the new Boulder DA, even though Keenan was involved in an incident of the DA's office trying to gain unauthorized access to war room police files, and their supposed ally at the Boulder PD, Steve Thomas, although Steve Thomas thoroughly despised Keenan as corrupt. Nancy Krebs' lawyer, Lee Hill, opined that, quote, the breakdown of communication between the families was just superfuge. Or is that supposed to be subterfuge? And much of the separation, I guess these are typos, was for show, just an apparent separation. He also expressed a belief that the Ramseys and the Whites knew each other long before their first official meeting in Boulder 1994, which I believe to be the case. So, okay, I mean, we've gone down so many rabbit holes here. I mean, this is just insanity. But some kind of overarching conspiracy, I mean, that could explain all of it, could it not? All right, now, I mean, just if you think that's not enough rabbit holes, let's go down another one. Searching Girl on the Jonbenet subreddit also posted this regarding the Whites trying to find out what was in the files. They were probably curious about what was disclosed regardless. Maybe the Whites are suspicious for another reason. Conspiracy theories abound in Boulder, and please don't shoot the messenger, but I have heard Nicole Kidman was in Boulder that night, and there was an eyes wide shut type scenario going on at the Whites that included Jill Zane Maxwell. And before people think she threw Maxwell in here for no reason, there is that famous photograph, allegedly, of Jill Zane Maxwell with Jonbenet Ramsey at a pageant. And of course, she has the local Colorado lawyers, happens to be the same firm that John Ramsey employs. And who knows how many of these other individuals have the same law firm as well. All coincidental, I'm sure. Think about this. Kidman was married to Tom Cruise at the time. He owned a ranch in Telluride. Who was the marshal there at the time, and what if the Whites paid someone to make sure this murder is never solved and prosecuted? Like I said, I'm just relaying the story, but I'm at the point where nothing would surprise me anymore. So I don't know where this information comes from that Nicole Kidman was in Boulder that night, but the thing about Kidman and her father, I mean, there are so many conspiracy theories, and then of course the Tom Cruise dialed into Hollywood, all of those scenarios. I mean, all of these people have the same lawyers. I mean, this is just insane. Man, let's keep going down the rabbit hole then here. Affectionate Fly posted this. Don't even get me started on the Eyes Wide Shut lead. Remember the part in the movie where Tom was buying his costume at the store called Rainbow Costumes? There was a part where the owner's underage daughter came out. It was implied that perhaps the owner of the store was also renting his daughter out. It is rumored that the section of Kubrick's movie that was cut out was a scene where the Satanists rape and sacrifice a child, as in That Child from the Rainbow Shop. Now let's go back and remember some of the weird lies Patsy told. Remember Patsy denying writing in the baby picture book, Rainbow Game Players? It was most likely her handwriting. Why lie and try to distance yourself from what she wrote? I don't have the answer, but I did start Googling everything to do with rainbows. That is what led me to the scene in Eyes Wide Shut. Then I found a kid's book. It's called The Rainbow Fish, which has an accompanying workbook called Rainbow Fish Game. The story is about a beautiful fish with unique scales that make her more beautiful than the other fish. She decides to take off all her scales and gives them to her friends. Thereafter, she feels naked and empty, but she is encouraged because now she has many more friends. Then I Googled rainbow and sex games. You don't even have to know about a rainbow kiss or rainbow sex. The rainbow kiss game is where teen girls are encouraged to wear different colors of lipstick and gives the guys in the room oral sex. I know, gross and sneaky. I'm not going to pretend to know what perverts and pedos do behind closed doors to get the kids to go along with the plan, but I suspect other like-minded people know exactly what the symbolism means. Also, and possibly totally unrelated, do you know what a rainbow girl is? They are a group of organized within the Freemasons. And guess who was a rainbow girl? Yup, Patsy. Her dad was a high-ranking Mason. I read that this was the organization that introduced Patsy and John. I know that later Patsy became one of those Freemason ladies of the Eastern Star. I forget the correct name. Okay, can anybody verify all that? I don't even know if I want to keep going down some of these rabbit holes. Samar Candy posted this. When I first came to the case, although I never thought Fleet had been involved in the murder of Jonbenet, I did think he had been sexually abusing her prior to her murder. But I changed my mind about that. I think he was protecting members of his family who were involved, the ones who came over from California for Christmas. I do believe Nancy's evidence about him, which I think she said he was involved in her abuse along with his father and his associates, but stopped around the time he was in his late teens. Then there were those missing years of his and even the use of a different name. Did he try to break away from his family then and then try to lead a clean life? And it was very unfortunate that his relatives came to visit him in December 96. I wonder if he was happy to welcome them or if he was forced to accommodate them. That's an interesting theory as well. I mean, we're going down every single possible rabbit hole. I mean, we really don't talk enough about people who are criminals or had criminal pasts or illicit pasts, and they really do try to change their way, or their ways, and they are dragged back in by family members or pressure that they can't fight off for whatever reason. Does that lead to more anomalies in the cases? Someone needs to research his life and who he associated with in all the years he and Priscilla lived in Boulder. In my opinion, I don't even think I even know the year it was when they arrived. Was it when Fleet the Third was born? Benny Baku posted this. Fleet really does have a murky past. John nor Patsy knew exactly what he did for a living. They weren't rich. Priscilla worked. And his reaction post-murder was beyond bizarre. His behavior read to me desperate and fear-driven. Now, how do we know that John nor Patsy knew what he did for a living? Did they say they didn't know while they did know? I mean, can we trust anything anybody says? Fleet cozied up to Steve Thomas quickly. Steve Thomas was a weak link to protect his secret. Thomas was good for it. I don't think he was involved in the murder. Merv Pugh and his connection puts him on the top of my list. Affectionate Fly posted this. Agreed, let's just say the worst case scenario about the Whites is true. Can you imagine being besties with these kind of people? Sorry, there is something to be said about the company you keep. Birds of a feather flock together. I feel like I would sense in my soul if someone was at the very least vulgar. How much more so a father-son generational pedo family? Surely instincts would tell you something eventually. Search and Girl posted this. Nothing surprises me anymore. The father in Aspen and the son in Boulder is too convenient. So many celebrities pass through Aspen. Filthy, rich, fat cats. I can totally believe a pedo ring passes through there. I struggle with John Ramsey's involvement in such a thing, but if someone was operating on a revenge and or blackmail scenario, it might be motive for the crime. So Affectionate Fly actually... Okay, so they posted this... I just noticed this comment on Mindshock. I worked in Marietta, Georgia in the early 2000s. I used to wax a group of girls' eyebrows. They were friends with Burke. They all went to the private school Lavette. All 3 or 4 of them told me that Burke told them that a business deal of his dad's went bad, and they were the ones that killed Jonbenet. They also said Burke was very nice. I suspect John was into some shady business and Lockheed could not afford for an investigation to be conducted on John or his business. Now, there's a little bit more in-depth conversation or in-depth description here by Affectionate Fly on the subreddit. Okay, this is hearsay. I lived in Marietta, Georgia, worked at a day spa waxing around 2000-ish. One day, a group of 3 or 4 high school girls came in to get their eyebrows waxed. They went to school with Burke. They told me that he told them his dad had a business deal that went sour and that they were responsible for the murder of Jonbenet. And not that this has anything to do with anything, but one day I came face to face with John Ramsey at a barbecue place during lunch. It was one of those random moments you don't forget. He looked at me like, "Do I know you?" And I did the same. It dawned on me about 10 minutes later who he was. See, this is also very interesting because I think a lot of cases could be solved if they simply interview a lot of even friends and acquaintances at the kids' possible witnesses or possible POI family members' schoolmates. Because kids talk, teenagers talk, even if they're just offhand comments. Now, again, Burke might have said that because he believed it was true or he heard his dad talking about it, possibly as a cover. So I don't know if he would just randomly say that to random girls to try to deflect attention away from either himself or his family. It seems more likely he believed it was true, even if it wasn't. So as far as he knew, perhaps that's what he believes is true. So apparently in the 1998 interview with Fleet White, he said that he didn't work. He didn't know he didn't know what? And he didn't know how they made the living. Priscilla mentioned they had a budget. Regarding what John Ramsey said, that neither as in John Ramsey's 1998 interview, he said that neither Priscilla nor Fleet worked. Here's another excellent post by Affectionate Fly in response to someone asking, hasn't Fleet White supposedly pushed the Ramseys to say what they know? Affectionate Fly posted this: I have thought about this. Think big picture. What if the powers that be, who have an interest in helping to cover up this story, created a spin to take the investigation away from the true perpetrator? How would you do that? Perhaps make it look like the Whites were against the Ramseys and earnestly wanted to see justice prevail. What if the spin crew wanted to point the guilt at the Ramseys over the Whites, with the idea that it would lead people away from some big pedo ring cover-up? I'm just rolling with this idea. What if Fleet White Sr. and Jr. were heavily involved in some organized kiddie porn, etc.? If they went down, then all the others would be implicated like dominoes. I want to know why the girl accusing Fleet White was not credible. Who says she wasn't? She was credible enough to put one pedo in prison. Her counselor put her own life and career in jeopardy with the idea of helping other kids. She was eaten up with pain and venereal diseases while talking to police. They had to continually hide her in new places while she was in Boulder. Why? I read the deposition. It was unsettling, but what do people expect? If this happened, it's not going to be a pretty story. You know what else is kind of weird? Going back to the 911 call, the official story was that Fleet White accidentally dialed it. This was at the Ramsey home 3 days before Jonbenet's body was found. So was there another type of sex party or whatever, some kind of satanic abuse or whatever is going on? Did someone want to blow the whistle? Is it possibly one of the children wanted to blow the whistle and something they interfered with it? Is it possible that 911 call somehow spiraled into something else and people getting afraid? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. The thing about, is it even 100% verified that he was the one who made the call? I mean, obviously there's sources that claim that he did in the Ramseys, but yeah, I don't know. That's kind of weird. Also, what's weird is Nancy Krebs also claimed this was all videotaped, as well as other sources, particularly those that you know, there are theorists who claim that Bill McReynolds was somehow involved and there is a videotape on the dark web. Well, Nancy Krebs was claiming this was all videotaped before any of these theories ever came to light. I mean, let's and one of these individuals is Thera Kuhn. And I went over some of their posts previously on Conspiracy NOPOL. They posted Jonbenet Ramsey and the pedophile network responsible for her murder. I mean, this goes into a lot of things, including North Fox Island. I've covered all of this on previous episodes, so check those out. I mean, this one's already getting pretty long, so I'm only going to go over the relevant point here in relation to what we're talking about. Others have come forward speaking about abuse relating to John Ramsey's friends, such as Fleet White. Nancy Krebs spoke of abuse, and her story mirrors a similar story perpetuated by Kathy O'Brien, who spoke about her experiences on Beaver Island of which John Ramsey allegedly frequented and on at least one occasion allegedly took a ferry with his daughter to. According to her, an operation was set up on Beaver Island that centered around the sexual exploitation of young girls. Beaver Island is very close to the Tri-Island area near North Fox Island, with it being Beaver Island, South and North Fox Islands. John Ramsey was also said to have been on a ferry with Kathy O'Brien's father, but the veracity of her comments on this has never been proven. She claimed many things that line up with this is how this network operated. And I mean, just when you think there can't be any more rabbit holes, I will just add this here too, because, I mean, if it's so common for crazy kooks to come out of the woodwork with these types of stories, because clearly Krebs has established some credibility in terms of who she was and connections with the whites, and putting away one pedophile, even if she made that story up, whatever, she's got some kind of credible baseline for association with the Fleet family at minimum. If this is so common, though, of crazy people coming out of the woodwork to accuse random people of this kind of satanic videoed abuse, why haven't we seen more of it? I mean, if there's that many crazy people out there, why do we have almost no examples of people like this? And I'm not going to get into John Mark Carr here, but some people allege that he was also involved in some kind of online network of these scumbags, and he possibly even saw a Jonbenet Ramsey video, and this was his version of blowing the whistle. In his deranged, demented mind, this is what he came up with, claiming that he was maybe responsible. I mean, look, if we're going down every rabbit hole possible, is it possible some of these scum actually pay money for these types of tapes and they wanted something done to Jonbenet Ramsey? So even though they weren't present at location, they like ordered a request for some kind of video and it was done and she happened to die, even if that wasn't the intention. I mean, we're talking about the lowest of the low scum in the world that would obviously be involved in this. But if this is true, and they are, does that explain why so many wackos have claimed to have killed her? Are they simply part of this online dark web network? Now, some people, of course, do not find Kathy O'Brien credible. So she claims to have been a victim of government mind control programs like Project Monarch, CIA's Project MK Ultra, and yeah, I mean, she's authored all these books, so some people believe she's not credible, whereas I don't know if Nancy Krebs is coming out with books and doing all these appearances. And Kathy O'Brien, of course, has made some really, really bold claims. So, yeah, I mean, including, obviously, these sex slaves rings, child abuse, and also presidents using hologram technology, etc., etc. Her claim is actually interesting because she claims that they're using hologram technology to make themselves look like reptilian shapeshifters. That's an interesting one, is it not? It's like the Operation Bluebeam version of David Icke. Because if David Icke's research is all legit and all of the witnesses are telling the truth in terms of they witnessed somebody glitching and turning into a reptilian alien, if that's all man-made technology, they could pass all these lie detector tests or whatever and appear credible because they are credible. That's what they saw. That doesn't mean that interdimensional alien shapeshifters are real. That just means they appeared to be using some kind of technology. But yeah, I mean, Beaver Island is another, I mean, that's another huge rabbit hole. Here's a post by Conscious Language 92. There are also, I believe, many connections or clues between the Ramsey case and the Oakland County child killer case in regard to details of places and dates, the age of children, etc. For example, Jill Robinson abducted Wednesday, December 26, 76, exactly 20 years to the day of Jonbenet. Both girls murdered. Both cases involve specifically bikes, Christmas, snow, both clothed. Jill was age 12, Jonbenet size 12 underwear. Both names start with the letter J. Jonbenet was found with beaver hairs on her hand. Jill was found next to Beaver Road sign. Jonbenet lived at 755 15th Street. Jill was found on I-75 highway, both with the numbers. John Ramsey's house in Charlevoix is directly opposite Beaver Island. He chose the house numbers in Boulder, Colorado. He chose the J in Jonbenet as in Jonbenet Ramsey. studied at Michigan University an hour from all the victims' location when discovered, owned a plane, owned a business called Access Graphics, $1 billion business. Thera Kuhn also posted this. I go over a lot in my previous series relating to how the International Access Graphics headquarters were set up in child trafficking hotbeds, including the same vicinity as Frances Sheldon was currently living. What the heck is this? Lady Frolic posted this. I agree with you. It's more than a coincidence. James Dudley J. Ramsey gave Frank Sheldon permission to build a landing strip on North Fox. Their connection isn't Ann Arbor, though. John Ramsey went to Michigan State in Lansing for both undergrad and a master's, not U of M. The link could have been pedophilic, aeronautic, and or Charlevoix. Sheldon owned land in Charlevoix, and I believe the Ramseys summered there in the 60s and 70s. Sheldon was between the ages of father and son. He could have befriended both. It wouldn't require blackmail if they were all like-minded. I mean, that's kind of insane, though, if the Ramseys were linked to North Fox Island specifically through different family members and that area. And then also Beaver Island there, directly across from the Charlevoix house. Wow. Okay, Thera Kuhn posted this. This is really one for the coincidence theorists who think that snuff films aren't real and, or there's no actual attempt to create them. Thera Kuhn posted this. Take, for example, the website Mariana's Web. The website featured 28,000 members who actively shared materials. 28,000. They arrested 3 people not far from where I am in Michigan for a plot to kidnap, rape, and kill a child from a carnival in the area, all on videotape so they could sell it on the dark web. They were one of the few groups who were caught. In this group, there were 2 men and a woman, proving it's not just a boys' club either. I mean, this is insane. And for those that think this is a fake post, again, like a lot of these so-called conspiracy theorists posting on Reddit, when you vet them, it turns out to be true. WZZM13.com on the ABC News here. It was actually 4 people arrested in plot to kidnap, rape, and murder a child. Matthew Toole and Talia Furman among them. I mean, this is insane. This was September 21st, 2018. So, I mean, this is just absolutely insane. And John Ramsey's father was Dudley Ramsey, who was implicated in North Fox Island. Let's go over another interesting post circling back to the Judge Long's alleged comments here. This comment is by Benny Baku. It is unfortunate corruption and greed's tentacles suck the life out of the good of the people. It's not just Boulder, but everywhere where there is money and power to be had. They are intertwined in our political system, our government, and in every global nation on this earth. In order to save the people and the good of the people, you need to cut the head off the snake. No one is willing to do it because they'll probably end up dead, or they are knee-deep in the evil corruption that only money can buy. They are content with selling their souls to the devil. That's the one thing to bring this case is an example of how sick the rich are, John Ramsey being one of the elite in Boulder. He wasn't, and the circle of friends they had weren't either. We don't know much about the Fleet's wealth or lack of, but Priscilla has the career while Fleet stayed home. With that in mind, the Fleets may have been comfortable financially with Priscilla working, but they didn't have money to throw around. Their friends in Boulder really didn't run with the rich and famous of Boulder, Colorado. Really, the Ramseys didn't always have money. They built the company as a family. I don't know how much of that is true based on John Ramsey's father, but this is a bit off the subject, but while I'm here, I think people should be reminded of the importance as far as Patsy is concerned. People like to point out how Patsy was really, really good at spending John's money. It wasn't his money, it was their money. She worked equally hard at building the company to the level that it was attracting a huge secretive company like Lockheed Martin. When they were first in Boulder, she was working for the company, but then she got cancer. Cancer changed her perspective on what was truly important, their children. The company was off and running. It was time for Patsy to invest her time to the most important asset they had, the kids. She did, and she was happy, and she could have had that opportunity. Not everyone can without financial sacrifice. Back to my issue with the pedophile rings and why I find it a dangerous diversion to this case. There was and is no evidence John Ramsey was involved in such a depraved network. This was a homicide. Why the Ramseys and Jonbenet were chosen, we don't know. We don't know because we don't have the missing piece. The intruder and or intruders. Until then, to spend energies on far-fetched theories that take people down rabbit holes serves no purpose except take you down rabbit holes of no return. Well, unless some of the rabbit holes are true. As far as whether this judge did or didn't state this just messes with the mind and focus of who did this. Then I wonder, how in the world did pedophile rings enter into this narrative? Children are murdered by psychopathos all too often, but how in the world does a ring of wealthy and powerful pedophiles come into play in this homicide, whereas in the murders of children in this country, such theories don't come into play? Well, and how many? In some of them they would, some of them they wouldn't, right? What is it in the Jonbenet case that fosters these theories? Was it because the Ramseys are wealthy? Was it because of the pageants? Was it because of the national coverage? Or, like the BDI theory fills in the weaknesses of the RDI theory, the PRDI, the pedophile ring theory, fills in the weaknesses in the IDI theory. The PRDI theory explains why the intruder wasn't and will not be found. They are protected by the cops and the bolder elite, who's protected by those up the political ladder. I have ranted enough. This will be the last I say about that. I mean, a lot of interesting points there. I mean, really, if they want this thing solved, they should just brain fingerprint scan for all remaining people. But this, I mean, going down these darkest of dark rabbit holes, I mean, it's just... It's really tough because it seems like nothing makes sense no matter where you look. And is it all by design? Because this vast conspiracy, as crazy as it might seem, does it explain everything? Now, obviously, without definitive hard evidence, you can't claim that it's true. And I'm not claiming it's true. I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. This is, of course, Mindshock, where we attempt not to fall for any logical fallacies of any kind. But if it's true and it explains all the variables, what are we supposed to do? Ignore it? I mean, obviously, evidence is needed, evidence beyond a reasonable doubt if we're going to criminal court. Now, this rumor of there being some kind of a snuff film on the dark web, if there's truth to it, you would think someone would have found it by now. Obviously, that's not something I messed with. I have zero interest in the dark web. That just sounds way too insane for me, not just regarding any kind of possible murders caught on video, but just the very nature of it in general. It just seems weird. I don't know. It just seems way too weird. There's too much of a criminal element across the board. But people who have been on the dark web, they can chime in here on how all that stuff works. I actually did an episode on the dark web with JR. You can check that out on Mindshock. It's an older episode. We didn't get into the Jonbenet Ramsey case, of course, or even other cases, just the general idea of criminals operating in the shadows, so to speak. But, yeah, I mean, this really is a one-of-a-kind case. You just don't see this many rabbit holes in other cases. So is it really possible that it's all mere coincidence that there's just even this many rabbit holes? I don't know. What do all the Mindshock listeners think about this? Chime in the comment section. Obviously, we have way more suspects to go over. This was a long one, but there's seemingly an endless amount of rabbit holes and suspects, each with an assortment of variables that can and cannot be dismissed. So definitely very, very mind-shocking across the board. So I hope everybody found another edition of Mindshock True Crime interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.